Hey, this is the Nick Will Talk About Anything podcast here in the studio. I've got BJ Shay visiting, happens to be in town, not under the best circumstances.
No, unfortunately.
Grandma just passed away, and she is one of my church members for as long as I've been here, and she'd been here for a long, long time. But our families run very deep, very parallel track in a lot of ways. Your dad, who passed away last June, yeah.
Yep.
That was very sudden and hit us all hard. Obviously hit you harder than me, but he was somebody that I considered a very good friend here and loved spending time with him. He was invited to church by one of my aunts. They grew up just down the street from each other in Flint, Michigan. And so they went to Flint Central Nazarene Church together. And then you and I have both been around in Tennessee around the same time as each other.
Yeah.
But our family, I've lived in, same towns like Flint, Nashville area. You guys were in Columbia, Spring Hill area. Your dad came down for Saturn?
For Saturn, yeah.
Yeah,
that
so that was right after they got started, right? They've been in operation for a little bit, I think, like 94 or something.
I think they actually started in about 89.
Okay,
Dad got offered to go down to Saturn initially, and he didn't really want to do that. And then the right bonus package came up. And he was like, well, we're kind of tired of living in Flint. There's some things here changing that we don't necessarily want to be a part of. It's closer to family because instead of having a 2-day drive to Christmases down here in Florida, we had a 1-day drive.
Yeah.
And
so now your mom's family is from like this area. We're in Zephyr Hills, so some of your mom's family, they moved here a long, long time ago. Like the 60s or something?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit more fourth wall breaking, you kind of handled that obituary today like a champ, trying to keep everything
there was a lot of
together.
Lot of names in there, and I'm like, some of them it gave details about them, and some of them it didn't, and I was like, oh. And then there was one of them, I don't remember who, but it was like 2 names that could be like male or female each, and I was like, so and so and their spouse so and so, because I'm like, I don't know if it's a he or a she. So, I muscled through that one.
Yeah, no, I watched that, and I think I said good job long enough for you to hear that.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
But it was one of those where, my family it's kind of interesting. Dad's side of the family is from basically where your family's from.
Yeah.
And then mom's family was originally in Indiana. And then in the 60s, Grandpa just needed to move to a different climate. It was either here or Arizona. He knew one person in Florida, and they happened to live in Zephyr Hills, and so they came here. And said, well, we know one guy, so that's better than knowing no guys. And it's one of those where they got invested in the community, and they got connected with Nazarene Church because they were from Kurtz, Indiana.
They weren't Nazarene affiliated before that? They were, okay.
There was one church in the town of Kurtz, Indiana, and it was Nazarene Church. So,
okay, so they went there.
They went there because that's all they had. Yeah. And they've been, I guess that would make me probably 4th generation Nazarene. Yeah. But
well, I'm as far as I know, just 3rd gen. Both sets of my grandparents were Nazarenes. My dad's family, all from pretty much around Michigan, at least for several generations they were. Yep. And then my mom's side was in Illinois, just a stone's throw. I mean, just like maybe half a mile from where Olivet Nazarene University is. And so that's how my parents met, was over there at the college. And my folks lived around there for a while after they graduated. My dad says he crammed a 4-year degree into 6 years, so but he started actually in a ministry track to be a youth minister, and did that for a while. Served in a couple different churches, actually out in Colorado for a little bit too. They moved back to Michigan for a little bit, and he was serving there, but he'd kind of gotten burned by 2 churches in a row that way. And that happens a lot in ministry for pastors, but also, and you're a youth pastor, right? I mean,
I'm actually
I've moved up changed?
In the world.
Okay.
So
you're not just a youth pastor anymore.
Yeah, my official title at Mustang Nazarene is the Creative Discipleship Pastor.
Creative Discipleship. I like that. So we're gonna have to dig into that in a bit.
Yeah, I'll put it real fast. Basically, I started there 5 years ago as their youth pastor.
It's been that long, okay.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so I was their youth pastor, and we got to the point where the youth department was really serving in like every area of the church. And we have this problem with youth groups where they start graduating. Right. And so we have a lot of students that went to Southern Nazarene University across town, and we just happen to have a really awesome youth band, like a ton of talent. And
nice.
Like when I got there, we had nothing. And I just said, "Hey guys, you want to play instruments?" And here they are, and like they just started learning them,
Okay.
and things took off, and it was crazy. And
So did you have like a somebody that, I mean, you play a little bit, right? Like a little guitar or
I'm
something?
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean, you weren't the teacher, right? So
I was,
you were,
and
okay.
still am.
So like with just a little bit of knowledge and talent, you're like, we can do this together. Like
Yeah,
we can
so
learn.
my goal in life was to never be the youth pastor that had long, shaggy hair, a beard, and played the acoustic guitar. And then so naturally I became that because my life and story is telling God the things I won't do. And
We'll
then
get to
he
Hawaii in a
laughs
minute, right?
and ends up being that. So actually in 2012, I had a fall retreat scheduled, and I was a youth pastor in the United Methodist Church at the time.
Yeah.
And I had a speaker booked, and I had a worship leader booked, and I was just going to go and hang out. And my worship leader had a work conflict come up that she couldn't get out of. So I had $200, and I had 5 days, and I had no worship leader. So I went to Guitar Center in Independence, Missouri. I bought an Ibanez V acoustic electric guitar, and I learned how to play 8 songs that week. And
That's really all you've got to roll through in a weekend, because most churches
yeah,
just roll through a very small catalog anyway. So like,
yeah.
hey, we can
The
just
the
tell them
problem
that we're
is,
going to really learn these songs deep this weekend.
yeah. So my problem was like I played piano growing up. I played
Okay.
bass in some bands in high school.
So you had a little
and I
knowledge,
played
yeah.
some chords, and I was like, I have no option. I have to learn this week, otherwise there's no worship at fall retreat.
Oh my goodness.
And I just looked up the most popular songs that our group knew and made sure I put them in the same keys. But I didn't know about this thing called a capo, where you could just learn G chords and go up and down. So
You could if you had learned that, you could have been like already a contemporary Christian musician. You
Yeah,
know, you had
so-
everything necessary. GCA,
So
GCA.
I was learning songs in flat keys and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, man, this is so hard. How do people do this? And I practiced 8 hours a day that week
Good
until
grief.
my fingers were bleeding. And
Yeah.
I was like, I actually have to stop practicing so that I can play this
You're
weekend.
like Brian Adams Summer at 69. Like, I played it till my fingers bled.
Yeah, yeah. And so long story short with that, ended up playing that weekend. I had an intern of mine sing.
Yeah.
And,
Nice.
I could play on beat and do well. And then I found this website called worshiptutorials.com.
Okay.
And everything just clicked.
Hmm.
And it's like, I did not play the guitar or sing, didn't want to do any of that. And then just through watching some online tutorials and the way that they taught, it just worked to where like
I'm
everything
gonna write
just
that down.
clicked. Yeah, definitely.
Worshiptutorials.com.
If there's any ministry site that I plug more than anything else, it is worshiptutorials.com, because what's
I'll put that in the
interesting-
show description later too at
Yeah,
the end,
you
or
should.
later on.
That would be awesome because
Yeah.
it's like I had no business knowing how to play the guitar, and
Yeah.
I never ever wanted to sing. And now all of a sudden it just clicked, and I was actually decent.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of mentors around who came in at about the same time, and they just like unlocked it for me.
Okay.
And so,
Nice.
and I've found that instead of just diving into books and theology and that sort of thing, nothing unlocked my ministry more than learning how to lead worship effectively. And
Yeah.
theology books actually made more sense, and they were easier to communicate. My prayers got better.
Yeah.
So just over years and years of, honing that skill and still being a pretty average player, I've been able to grow quite a bit to the point where, where I'm at now. I walked in and I was like, hey, since I learned it this way, you
You
can
guys
learn
can
this
too.
way too.
Yeah.
Because I have no business being here. And then all of a sudden we had these kids like learning how to play really well. And now we have a rotation of youth instruments, and we have a college band. We have all these people, and our youth band actually won Extravaganza, which is
Okay,
a regional
yeah.
talent competition for the southwest
Yeah.
field of the Church of the Nazarene. So they were the best band in all of the southwest field. And
And you're like, I can't take any credit. Actually, I can take a ton of credit for this.
like-
It's mostly God, but I did a lot of stuff.
God
like-
did a lot of this, but I put the instruments in their hands, and
yeah.
the kids were faithful, and God was even more faithful. And so
Wow.
just over time, it's been one of those things where the more that we've had needs at the church, where it's like, how do we recreate this kind of healthy culture where we implement and be in service in different areas
Yeah.
that are outside of our comfort zone? How do we expand that from the youth ministry without hurting the youth ministry
Yeah.
by moving me out of that role? And so
So-
the time was right with a guy that we felt pretty good about in the talent pipeline at SNU.
Yeah.
We hired him as a discipleship decision, where it's like, if we really believe in discipleship being we teach people how to do what we did,
Mm-hmm.
and then we put them in place, and we empower them and give them everything that we can and support them from the back,
Yeah.
and celebrate when they kill things that we invented for the youth group, which I have been doing.
Yeah.
You know, we have Noah in place now in the youth ministry, and the youth ministry is growing. We're probably going to have to split
Okay.
from junior and senior high,
Yeah.
because we had one group, and now it looks like we're going to have two.
Hey, cool.
And so as we were faithful in me stepping out of that ministry, we've also been faithful in seeing the worship ministry and the creative and technology ministries grow too.
Good.
So
it's good.
Yeah.
So I love that you're talking about a leadership pipeline, you know, that's basically starting as early as junior high. I mean, honestly, earlier than that probably, but that was the part that you were able to oversee. But looking at those kids and saying, you know, not every one of them is going to be a leader,
Right.
but they're all going to be serving Jesus if you have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, working within that, and then the only way you're going to see who has like callings and qualifications for leadership is going to be in seeing people serving, and you see some. And I was listening to Larry Osborne recently talking about this, and he's like, you know, the church runs on two tracks. You know, one of them is leadership, and one of them is servanthood. And don't think that those have to merge together. He's like, because not everybody that serves, not everybody that's a Christian is going to become a leader. So don't think like the highest goal for everyone is like, oh, you have to be a pastor someday. Like that needs to be your track. Some people it will be. Percentage wise, it's not going to be that many, but we have to have both of those. You know, the church runs on both those tracks. And so, you know, it was really encouraging to hear him say that, because it's like, don't look at everyone that has potential to serve in a great way and think, okay, now we've got to make you just like me.
Right.
We got to make them just like Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that really challenged me a bit, because, you know, it's almost like we've put that on a pedestal, like, oh, pastor is some position on a pedestal. It's like the highest achievement. And in all reality, it's probably not, unless that's exactly what God's called you to do. If God's called you to do that, you better do it.
Yeah, and I think that lay ministry, just from being a pastor and having lived in several places and in multiple denominations and parachurch ministries, lay ministry is even more critical in a lot of ways than pastoral ministry is, because, you know, I had fantastic youth pastors growing up, and I can probably remember about 4 words that they said in sermons.
Yeah.
But I also had fantastic Sunday school teachers
For sure.
growing up. And, you know, for example, my 3rd grade Sunday school teacher in Tennessee was a guy named Herschel Curry.
Okay.
And he's passed now. But it was one of those things where I'm a brand new kid in a new town. I'm from the north, kind of inner city sort of vibes. And then I'm out in the country.
I remember the feel of moving from the north down to the south and all that stuff. It's like, it is different.
And so, like,
very different.
The biggest rite of passage at that church was to go through Herschel's 3rd grade Sunday school class with the boys. And if you went every Sunday for the quarter, he'd give you a Bible the first quarter.
Okay.
And then if you went through every Sunday for the next quarter, he'd give you a pocket knife.
Okay.
So, you know.
This is great. Like, I love it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, like, in churches today, they're like, all right, we're going to give all them boys a pocket knife. It's like, I don't know about that. It's like, no, trust me, it's a good idea.
So here's the funniest thing. So I get my first pocket knife, and I'm really excited. I'm 3rd grade, 9 years old, and I'm running through the halls at Columbia Grace Church of the Nazarene with this. It's about this big.
Yeah.
It was a Red Baron pocket knife.
Okay.
So it had like scenes of like biplanes and dog fights. It was just a beautiful knife, and I wanted to show everybody how cool it was. So it was also one that had one of those buttons that you had to have to close, and being 9 years old, your hand strength is not what it will become.
So you couldn't get it shut.
So I opened it, and then I was like, look how cool my knife is, everybody. And then we're all trying to get it closed. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go find like this wall to like put it against the corner with.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm being careful, but that's not the reputation a 9-year-old boy with a knife has.
Right.
And so I'm walking, you know, carefully, with knife down, that sort of thing, and it's like just protruding like I'm a dagger in a Slayer
like about to
movie
stab
or
something.
something.
Yeah.
And the 2nd grade girls Sunday school teacher comes around the corner and lets out a blood-curdling scream. So we're like, you know, the whole place just stops, and I'm so embarrassed.
They've got you on like a watch list for,
like,
for a while.
I'm trying to
after
close it. I just come to this wall to put it against there and close it. And so, you know, it's funny the things that I remember about that experience, but what it did.
I carried a pocket knife around church all the time when I was a kid, and I remember like there was this like storage closet at the end of the hallway, like underneath the stairwell or something, and it was locked, and I just never understood why it was locked. and I just wanted to know what was in there. And my dad's like counting the offering, you know, and so like where the door trim was, I found out if I could stick the blade between the door trim and the door jamb, I could just push the plunger thing and like and get in there. Actually, you know what I remember? It was the old bathroom, and I think they could just close it down because something didn't work and nobody ever went there. So like, we'll just lock that men's room. You know, we don't need to fix that ever. And so I'd probably just like, well, why is it locked? It's a bathroom, you know? So I'm like, are they hiding something in here? And so I was probably like 9 or 10, you know, but I had a pocket knife. And,
you know, most churches have the secret bathroom too. So maybe it was that.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah. No, that was in the old section, you know, the old part of the church where it was like the old, I don't know, it had this like red carpet and you know, just it was fun.
This is at Flint Central?
No, this was in Ortonville.
Okay.
At Ortonville, Michigan, at the it was then the Lake Louise Church of the Nazarene, creatively named because right across the street was Lake Louise.
Hey.
And then later it became the Brandon Church. And to be honest, I don't know if that actually closed down or what happened, but now some folks that I know that are they're from Flint, then they actually kind of kickstarted a new iteration of the church in Goodrich, because that church was up and down, closed and opened and closed and opened, and they actually started a congregation there a few years ago that started booming pretty quickly, and so the district I think approached them and said, hey, do you want, you know, this what was Brandon Church in Ortonville, it's not either not open or whatever, it wasn't happening. So they basically inherited a building with tons of years of deferred maintenance. And you know, a lot of potential, but just a lot of work and a lot of money. And then and in a place where Nazarene congregation hadn't thrived in a long time. So I'm not sure how that's going. I've got some friends that are actually going there, and I've heard from them a little bit about the startup work, but I don't know if they've even had services there or not. But I've got a lot of fond memories of that church, and you know, just doing all kinds of stuff and cutting the grass on Saturdays. You know, we'd load up the old John Deere lawn tractor on the old trailer, like with the tilt deck. It was like a snowmobile trailer. And for people in Florida, snowmobiles are something people ride up north in the snow. They're the best thing ever. Anyway, we'd pull it behind a Chevette, an 86 Chevy Chevette, and with a push mower in the hatchback of the car, and we'd roll over there on a Saturday and cut the grass, you know, and fun times. You know, I got good memories of that church though, and I mean that's where I kind of learned to serve. Sometimes it was just hanging out waiting for my parents to finish, and then once you get a little older, you're like, well, I guess I might as well do something. You know, clean up something, fix something, do whatever.
Mess around with the soundboard.
Mess around with the soundboard. I wasn't allowed to do that at that church. I actually never messed with the soundboard until I was in my 20s and had moved to Tennessee. At that point, there was a church where their sound guy had literally walked out in the middle of a service because somebody ticked him off, and he'd had enough, I guess, and he left. And so I went to visit my friend there. I was in between churches, and I went to visit my buddy that had started going there, and he was running there. It was probably PowerPoint at the time. It might have been Media Shout. I think it might have been Media Shout
2 or something.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the beta testing version, you know. But no, so I just went in the sound booth to like talk to him, and the pastor who I had met like at somebody's house, like at a Memorial Day gathering or something. So I'd met the pastor before that congregation, and so he remembered me, and he's like, hey, do you know how to run sound? I'm like, a little bit, like thinking how hard can it be, right? And so he's like, well, we don't have a sound guy right now, and if you could just make sure nothing goes wrong. I'm like, okay. I wanted to hang out with my buddy anyway, so I ended up, you know, starting to I knew a little bit somehow or another, but I don't know where I picked it up, just hit bits and pieces here and there. And so I just kind of started figuring out what everything did on the board. And it's really not that complicated. You look at them and it's like, this row right here has to do with that one input, and these are all your options to control it. It's pretty simple, you know. It can be screwed up, but it's pretty simple.
You know, it's one of those too where it's like, it looks scarier than it is. And yet there's always something new to learn with it.
There is.
But what I've found is, you know, generally the older I get, the less room I have to learn all the new intricate things I can do on pieces of equipment like that. So that's where it is, you know, typical.
Well, I mean, even what we're doing here, like recording a podcast, so it's like I had to learn a bunch of stuff at the beginning of the pandemic for putting, like, we weren't doing any video services. We're a small church where I'm at, and there just wasn't a need. Most of our people aren't tech savvy, and I know there's a whole bunch of other people you might be able to reach outside of your congregation, but at that time it wasn't a priority. And then all of a sudden COVID hits and we're not able to be in our building,
Yep.
and it's a priority. So not only did I learn a lot about recording and things like that, but I also started putting our services that we were recording while we were in like lockdown mode. I started putting them on DVDs because I realized a bunch of our people don't actually do the internet. They don't have computers. So I'm like, okay, I still want them to feel connected to the church. I don't know how long this is going to last. So I started recording them like, on Friday or Saturday on a DVD. I'd burn a bunch of DVDs, and then we would go around on Sunday morning and deliver them to our congregation and like hand them to them at the door, like, here you go. And it's so funny because it's like everybody was so worried with everything with COVID, and all these folks, some of the older folks, they were just like, it's okay, like, I've lived this long, it's not gonna hurt me. And I know that's not everyone, but it seemed like that was a lot of our people's
and it's
experience.
like, well, I don't want to be the reason why anything goes wrong.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, exactly.
So I'm gonna be in my hazmat suit and just
Right,
wave at you.
right. Well, and I'm the one
now-
that's going from here to here to here, and so like I don't want like the breakout to be my fault for trying to do something nice, and so it's like, but it was a good way to keep check on him, and so that was really interesting times for sure. But ever since then, it's like, okay, so then we started back in person, but half our people weren't there, so now we're learning like OBS Switcher Studio and stuff like that, which we're using now to record. And it's just like, oh, this is simple. But boy, I remember like those first few weeks, I was swimming. I'm like, I don't want to learn all this anymore. I'm tired of learning new things. So
no, definitely a lot of that crosses so many bridges. I mean, but you think about the pandemic, what it really did is it really forced a lot of churches to recognize that the world has already changed. And that it's already operating differently, and it gives us the blessed opportunity, we'll just say it that way, blessed opportunity of how do we figure out ways and methods to get the things that need to be communicated in our churches and in our ministries. How do we figure out new methods to do the things that are essential to the faith? And so, it's kind of terrifying thinking, okay, so what are going to be the next things? So where like we see church all the time and we're reactive to change. One of the things that I was excited about since I was still in youth ministry at that time when everything started in 2020 was I had no rules anymore except don't kill anybody and try to do something.
And
so
don't eat meat with blood in it, and don't be sexually immoral. I think that's what Paul wrapped it up as.
And they were like, we truthfully just want you to try to do something with the kids. So like,
well, I mean, it wasn't that the struggle? That was the struggle with like, because youth groups, they didn't want to meet on Zoom. The older folks were like, we'll do something on Zoom, and we were okay with that. And we were already using Zoom here at the church for a couple creative things before the pandemic, so that one was easy. That was easy to jump into. But then like youth groups, I was talking to the youth pastors, and they're like, we don't know what to do. Like our youth group is not meeting here. So like Fortnite, right?
Fortnite, man. Like we did Fortnite, we did Rocket League. We would just do different
wherever
days.
The kids already are, right?
Yeah. So what we look for were cross-platform games.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to get into the system battle where it's like, Mom, I need a PS5.
Right.
PS5 didn't exist in the pandemic, but that's okay.
Fair enough.
It's like, well, you already have a great Xbox. Why do you need that? So we would look for
cross-platform. BJ said we have to. Yeah.
We have to cross-platform games that were free.
Oh yeah.
Or very low cost,
and
not
keeping anybody excluded. Yeah.
So what ended up happening is our youth group went from being just in Mustang, Oklahoma, to I had a buddy in Pineville, North Carolina, who was a youth pastor there, and we played.
Who is that? Fortnite. I think I know somebody from there.
So I know that you might know. It's my friend Joe, so I knew him from the SMU area.
Yeah, no, I mean
Pineville's a pretty well-known Nazarene Church.
Okay, that might be why. I was gonna say it just sounds familiar. I think I know why. I think I know somebody that's there, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I think I know who it is. You're bringing up something interesting to me because I was actually watching a podcast with Lex Friedman. He's one of the guys I like to pay attention to, and he actually had Mark Zuckerberg on, and they do like a 2-3 hour long, face to face like we're doing here. And and there was a lot of stuff I wanted him to ask him that he didn't ask, and,
Right.
and he touched on a few other things about privacy and his his Facebook snooping on us and that kind of stuff. He didn't touch on like some of the um, censorship or whatever stuff that a lot of people are concerned with, and he just didn't seem to be. Maybe that was a no touch subject. I don't know.
Maybe.
But one of the things I talked a lot about was the metaverse.
Yeah.
And it got me to thinking. I'm like, are we as the church? Did we learn our lesson through COVID and all the advances we had to make quickly to get with the times?
Yeah.
Are we ready to start sending like digital nomad missionaries into the metaverse
Yeah.
whenever it's live, whenever it's a thing? Like, because I already know there's going to be like the people that don't have, I'll say, a similar grasp on eschatology that probably you and I
Right.
share,
Yeah.
that are going to be like, oh, that's the mark of the beast, or that's the
Right.
end times, or whatever. And so there's going to be a lot of fear surrounding it. Are we going to be willing to utilize that platform?
Yeah. And you have to hope that just through watching how we've used the internet, which some would argue is the metaverse already,
Yeah, right.
just
It's kind of
not
surreal already.
not quite as immersive
Yeah.
as what we will probably encounter in the future.
Yeah.
But I mean, just the fact that we have the ability to have scripture in everybody's device.
Oh yeah.
And we have the ability to have, for example, I was driving back from my wife Deanna's graduation from the seminary
Mhm.
last week, and I was watching my youth band lead worship without me for the first time on a rhythm, and
Wow.
they did great. But like,
It's like mom and dad went on their first date, left the kid with the baby.
Yeah,
So they're
and
like,
it's
"Are you
like,
okay?" Or we're watching the teddy bear cam or
so I'm
whatever.
watching, and it's like, oh, they're killing it. This is great.
Yeah.
Not actually killing it.
Right. Yeah.
They're doing a good job. And so I'm like, I'm in the same place mentally
Yeah.
that they are, just
Right.
not physically.
Right.
And so like we've accepted that partially
Yeah.
in our culture. And I am somewhat at struggle with that because
Sure.
I know from experience, man, it's better when we're together.
Yeah.
But at the same time, am I willing to reject being together in spirit
Mm-hmm.
because I can't be together physically?
Yeah. That's
And
good.
so,
And if we're if we really do believe the things that the scripture says about the Spirit of God and our
Yeah.
own experiences with the Spirit of God, we know that we're in unity on that. I think
Yeah.
of being at General Assembly,
Yeah.
and Church of the Nazarene does that every 4 years, and we gather from all over the world into one place and have this like week long worth of meetings and services. But there's like a missionary service too. But at the beginning of one of these services, they start having all these like so and so is sending greetings, and it's
Yeah.
like all these groups from all over the world that are our brothers and sisters in Christ, and also members of the Nazarene Church. They're sending these greetings to us. And the first time I heard something like that, I was like, well, that's just weird. And then
Yeah.
after a while, it's like, no, this is actually really neat. This
Yeah.
is, they're like, we can't be there physically with you, but we are in the same, by the Spirit of God, we are there with you. And so
Yeah.
we're sending you our greetings to say, like, we're one in heart and soul.
Yeah, it's as if when Paul wrote that in his letters.
Like, I want to
That
be
meant
with you. Yeah. Yeah.
And imagine if he could have been
Yeah.
with the people that he was trying to shepherd and disciple from far and from prison.
Yeah.
It's one of those three-dimensional readings of scripture that we tend to gloss over
Sure.
sometimes because it's like, oh yeah, they actually had like real life problems.
Yeah.
And it's not just, basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Yeah. A little more in depth than that
How
at
to not
times.
screw up your life. It's like these are real life stories of people who are trying their best to understand the timeless will of God
Yeah.
and to speak it into the context that they live in.
Yeah.
And they were experimenting in a lot of ways that we are. Just
Sure.
their context was different.
Their context was different, but in a lot of ways, they had similar type of struggles. I mean, look at some of the stuff Paul wrote, like to the Corinthian church. He's like, what is it you guys are doing? Like, I heard, like, it might be a rumor, but I heard one of you guys is having an affair with your mother-in-law. Like, don't do that, or stepmom or whatever it was. It's like, don't,
Yeah.
stepmom, I think. He's like, just don't. Okay, like, even the pagans, like, the worst of the worst aren't doing this stuff. And you guys have, like, you bear the name of Christ. Like, stop it, And we're like, oh, we're so much worse off than it was back in the good old days. It's like, when was the good old days? When
Yeah.
was there a time?
I think that was called Eden.
Yeah, I think so. And it's good to long for that because I believe God's working to bring that.
It
That's
is
if
the
we read,
narrative,
if you
yeah.
open the last page, like that's what he's
Yeah.
going to do. But in the meantime, here we are, and you said something beautiful earlier in the memorial service for your grandmother, about how, she was working, she longed for heaven where, she's at the side of Christ right now. But
Yeah.
at the same time, she worked here on this earth so hard to bring that heaven to earth and
Yeah.
to like steal bits and pieces of it from eternity and plant it here right
Yeah.
now. And that's what we should all be doing. And I hope, I hope your family and I hope everyone that was there heard it, because I mean, I've been in that position before as a minister who was called upon to do the funeral service for one of my relatives that passed away,
Yeah.
who was a Christian. And I know some of my family either is struggling, they're on the fence, or they've left that faith that
Right.
they had imparted to them earlier in life. And I love these people.
Yeah.
And I want to see them live up to every bit of the potential that God has called them to here on this earth. I want to see them in heaven too, but right now I want to see them living the life that God has called. And one of the things that I've realized as my calling in life is to this local town and not just to this congregation at Zephyril's First Nazarene, because the longer I've lived here, the more I see the hurt and the struggle and the pain that people live with. And I look at it and I say, that is not how God created us to live.
Right.
And I look at the sin in my own life and what it's caused, and I say, this isn't how God created me to live.
Yeah.
And I look back to Genesis in the first couple chapters and I see what it meant to be the image of God and what was lost there when sin entered the world. And I say, God's working to restore that.
Yeah.
And he will. And through Christ, he's provided for that to happen. But in the meantime, we still have the mess of this world going on, and there's something to be done about that. And in some weird wisdom that God has, he called people like you and me and everyone else that's a believer in his redemptive work. He's called us to work alongside of him.
Yeah.
Like he could do it so much better than we could if he would just do whatever God stuff he can do. And yet he's like, how about you guys do it with me? Like, what? What are you thinking, God?
Yeah. And it's interesting because the kingdom is participatory on every level.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that sometimes we find ourselves getting out of, is the idea that obedience to God is not for God's benefit.
Yeah.
Obedience to
That's
God
good.
is
Wow.
for our benefit.
Yeah.
And the reason why he commands us to do things is not because he wants us to not have as much fun or not be able to get all the cool things done in life that we want to do, or it's not that he's trying to limit us. It's that he knows what's best.
Yeah.
And history has proven over and over and over again that when we're in the driver's seat, we tend to make less than perfect decisions. And if I were to have my way, we had a wonderful barbecue lunch today.
Oh, so good.
And we happen to have leftovers at my house. But if I were to have my way, I would probably eat and eat and eat and eat and eat barbecue all day, every day.
It's very good barbecue.
And
barbecue in general is good, and that barbecue today was so
fire.
good.
It was fire.
I mean, just straight up.
And it's one of those things where if I just gorge myself, that is not in my best interest. Do I have the right to make that decision? Absolutely. I have the free will to make a bad decision on my own behalf.
Yeah.
However, if I follow guidelines from somebody who knows more than me, and I follow the example of people who have taught me, hey, if you don't want to have issues, and if you don't want to gain a ton of weight, and if you don't want to maybe have some terrible cholesterol and stuff like that.
Basically, if you don't want to die a really slow, very painful death with a lot of medical procedures along the way, reel it in a little bit.
Maybe moderate.
Yeah.
But
moderation is a good position on most things in life, not everything.
Not everything. So humanity, I've always thought, I forget who I'm stealing this from, but it's a pendulum.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where we go back and forth between things because we don't have the ability to stay in the center.
I think you might have stolen that from me, but I might have stolen it from somebody too. But I talk about that all the time, and I see that at work in individual people's lives, but also in like especially in politics or in generations of the church or something like that, or just in generations in general. There's one group that'll look at the things they hate that another group did, whether that's the generation before
Yeah.
or whether that's, the left looking at the right and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so we elect a president that is bombastic, says a bunch of dumb stuff, does some stuff that's good, some stuff that's bad. The people that hate him hate the bad stuff he did, so then they put somebody else in office that's the opposite of him in so many ways. And they're like, well, we're going to yank that pendulum back over here. And we're like, yeah, but what about, and it's like, why can't we just kind of like slowly bring it, just a nice little pendulum in the middle where we can vacillate back and forth, because like the left doesn't get everything wrong and they don't get everything right, and the same for the right wing. It's just like, it's like there's so many things. It's like if you could just give up this one little stance here, you'd have so much right here. And if you would just loosen up some of this, and we could just pull some of that best stuff. But we have two parties and they've got to be polar opposites, and you've got to find yourself somewhere on that pendulum. And then in the Nazarene Church, we're fairly moderate in our theology on most points. There's some things we might be a little more radical to one direction or another, and yet we're fairly moderate. And a lot of times I think Jesus lived that way too, and there were always people that were trying to say, Jesus, don't you believe this? Shouldn't we, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And the zealot and his disciples was like, no, like we should murder Caesar and everyone, taxation is theft. All taxation. It's like, well, but I like the fire department and roads, like these are good things. I'll voluntarily pay for,
the
and
poli-sci major in me is coming out there.
Oh boy. Yeah. That's, but yeah, the pendulum thing, right?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but the good news is, and that's to bring things back around to the church, when we come to the table of Christ, that's the place where it's supposed to be the dangerous intersection of all of the different viewpoints come together as one in the body and the blood of Christ, where everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody is invited, everybody is wanted. And if you look at who Jesus interacts with, and you look at the ones that he outwardly loves the most, they're the ones that sometimes are the least viewed upon in society. And then if you look at the ones that he's outwardly frustrated with the most, it's the ones who think they get it the most.
Yeah.
And it's even hard as a pastor, because here's a confession. The Pharisees in Scripture existed because they went to Babylon and they said, never again.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn everything I possibly can to never be far enough away from God to make a mistake ever again.
And they recognize
that's what took them away from the spirit of the living God. And it's that pendulum thing.
Yeah. And they had recognized that the reason they had been exiled to Babylon was their unfaithfulness to God and to his law. At least their descendants had been. And so, they were so almost militant in their strict adherence to the religion. And so to the point where Jesus, who probably agrees honestly with most of their theology, it was their practice that was the problem. He's like, these guys are hypocrites, and so he had all these woes to them, and you're probably aware of this, but it's like there were actually several different types of Pharisees that were all considered hypocritical by the other groups of Pharisees. Like, you guys are hypocrites because you do this thing. There were some that they're like, we keep our head down and don't look at anyone because we might see a pretty woman and lust after her, and so we can't look at anything. And then they run into stuff all the time, and they're bruised and bloody and everything. He's like, are you guys serious? And so he probably agreed with them on most of their theology, their understanding of Scripture, and definitely on their devotion. But the problem was, their hearts were actually far from God. Yeah. And so when they would make a disciple, guess what? They would make him a son of hell. Yeah. Instead of a son of God.
And so, that's why different guy, Nicodemus.
Yeah.
Very different guys.
Yeah.
We preached about Nebuchadnezzar last Sunday at our church. But,
sure, if that's what you got to say is a tongue slip.
Yeah,
okay.
That's why Nicodemus is one of my favorite characters in Scripture.
Yeah.
Because he's the guy who you see a distinct arc of his story, where in John 3, he comes under the cloud of dark, and he's like, hey, what are you really saying? Because I'm trying to figure this out.
We're interested in you, but...
Like, you're saying a lot of really good stuff, but I just don't know.
Yeah.
And then later on, it comes to the point where people are, saying they want to kill Jesus, and he's like, well, isn't
are you
supposed to get a trial at least? And they're like, well, you're with him too. And then and then you find him at the tomb with Joseph of Arimathea, And so he goes from being a guy who's like, I just want to get it so bad.
Yeah.
And even if his perspectives were flawed,
Mm-hmm.
he started where he was.
Yeah.
And, you know, in Christian circles, we give Pharisees the worst rap
Right.
without realizing that most of the time we most resemble them.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a really good youth pastor in my last few years of youth group, at the time I was graduating, and he was he was talking about that, and he says, we always picture ourselves as if we are standing like right behind Jesus, probably where his disciples were when he's like pointing his finger at the Pharisees. And we're like, yeah, you get him, Jesus. Like, we're pointing over his shoulder, like, you get him, you tell them. And he's like, well, I was actually talking to you guys too,
We're also
you
not going to
identify
cut
with
off the
them.
guy's ear like Peter did
Yeah.
too. So.
Now, my theory on that is that Peter was really terrible with the sword. Like, he's a fisherman, right? And it was a sword tool. It wasn't like a sword like Zorro had, it was more like a knife thing, whatever. Anyway, my theory is that he was going for the guy's head. Like, he was trying to take it off, and the guy like ducked, and he just got
there
the
was
ear.
indecision where he's like,
maybe I shouldn't.
Jesus does no ear.
But I'll take the ear. And so, like, that's my theory, is that Peter was just like, I'm taking this dude's head off. I'm going to take somebody with me. And Jesus like, hey, you know what? I could have put his head on too, but I'll do this.
Yeah.
So, so earlier there was something you had said about not telling God, what you won't do. And so I want to ask about Hawaii.
It always comes back to this.
I want to ask about Hawaii. So a lot of people, like, when, like, people like me, they're like, hey, hey, we were moving to Florida, and they're like, oh man, you're lucky. I'm like, not really. I don't like the heat,
Hey, hot weather
and I don't care about like beaches or whatever.
Yeah.
And then of course we're in Zephyr Hills, which is an hour and a half from any beach.
Anything.
So it's like, it's just hot and humid and full of bugs and alligators where I live.
Yep.
But and you think, oh, it's like green all the time. It's like, no, it's actually brown for several months out of the year, and even the green isn't the deepest hues of green. So it's like, for a guy that does like lawns and landscapes, it's actually kind of ugly at times and boring. But some people are like, oh man, Florida sounds great, and they might also say, hey, Hawaii's great, and then God called you there.
Yeah. So I'll just use the easiest term that I can. When I was in high school, I was a punk, and I wanted to be a lawyer when I grew up.
Okay.
After I decided that I was unlikely to be a professional baseball player, because that was first option.
Okay.
Obviously didn't work out.
But didn't happen.
It was one of those where I went to Trevecca and I was a pre-law major because I knew I was called to ministry. I just didn't want to be. And so
you ran from that for a bit.
Yeah, so there's several layers of that story, but essentially I'd gone through a few different traumatic things my junior and senior year, and got to the point where I was graduating and I was considering a career in politics, or I was considering the Navy, and this voice kept saying in my head around Easter time of 2009, you're supposed to be a pastor. And I'd had some real crazy, again, long story kind of stuff where I knew. And it's like this voice just kept saying, you're supposed to be a pastor.
Yeah.
You just need to apply. And I was like, no church in their right mind would hire me if they knew anything about me.
You're having like the Moses thing now, where he's like, "Oh no, God, my voice. I'm not good. I'm not smart. I'm not eloquent. Send somebody else.
Anyone else.
Else.
Like,
how about your brother Aaron? All right, I'll just send him."
So God has a sense of humor. I firmly believe. I think that is overstated sometimes, but in this case, I literally felt prompted the words, "You won't." And so, pre-law school BJ was like, "Okay, so." Here's the deal, God. I'm going to apply for one job, one time. It's going to be the first job that I see on the Trevecca job board for a youth pastor position, because that's one that I could reasonably consider I might get hired for. I'm going to tell them everything about me, all of the trauma and stuff I've gone through these last couple of years. And
there's no way they'll do it.
When they say no, notice I said when
they say no.
When they say no, you have to leave me alone for the rest of my life. But if they somehow say yes, then I will do this for the rest of my life, because it'll clearly be a call from you that I'm supposed to do this. And so I go on the Trevecca job board, and the only youth pastor job on there at the time is Paradise Park Church of the Nazarene, now Connection Point Church of the Nazarene, in Kea, Hawaii. what's interesting is I'd been in philosophical debates with people about how it was extremely irresponsible for people that are not native Hawaiians move to Hawaii and tax their ecosystem and the cost of living, all
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I'd actually won debates about why what I was about to do was stupid. And so I was like, oh man, I also hate hot weather and I hate sand.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I'm sitting there, I'm looking on this job board. I said, I'm going to check back tomorrow. I really will do this bet with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept trying to find reasons why I wouldn't have to do it. So I started looking on the Craigslist job board. It's
Sorry,
like, yeah,
I just thought about like what a troll farm Craigslist is right now, but
yeah.
back then it
Back
was
then
it was pretty early. Like
it was
that was
not
fairly early.
respectable, but it was
No,
not
but it was legit
disrespectful.
enough. Like I bought and sold a lot of stuff
Yeah,
without
it
worrying
was no
for my
Facebook
life.
Marketplace,
You know,
but
Facebook Marketplace is going to be a bit of a cesspool these days too.
yeah.
But
So I'm on Craigslist, like
oh
scrolling
man,
for jobs,
Craigslist.
and so I don't see anything. It's like no, none of these work, none of these work, and it just kept hearing this voice say, "You won't."
Hmm.
Like God is literally saying, "You won't."
Okay.
And I can't explain it any other way. And then after a month of like checking the job board 3-4 times a day, I finally sent in my law school resume.
Like this
And
job is still posted a
still
month
posted.
later.
And like there's all kinds of things going on there. And it's one of those where it's like, man, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And then I started to panic,
Yeah.
where it's like, I send in my resume and I remember just like knowing I was going. And it's like, oh man, I am a pre-law student.
Yeah.
And I just applied for a youth pastor job that I'm going to get. So I remember going to the dining hall at Trevecca and like looking just like lost. And so I sat down at a table with some of my friends and, they were like, hey, are you okay? I was like, I just applied for a youth pastor job in Hawaii. I'm going to get it. I don't want to go. And
Like
I
easy,
just
Hoss. You
know
haven't
I'm
interviewed
going.
yet.
And so one person went, if you get that job, I'm leaving the country. They were already going to go teach
Okay.
English in Korea.
Okay,
Right?
I was gonna say I was gonna be like, oh.
And then another guy said, well, that only makes sense. I figured it'd take a couple more years.
Oh, that's
And I was
funny.
like, these are not the responses that I was expecting to get. So I went to talk with one of my professors that semester was Bryce Fox
Oh, yeah.
at Trevecca. And I was like, hey, so I did this thing. And I'm going. Is that okay? And he
Now,
said,
was this your senior year? You
yeah,
said
senior year, like I'm about to graduate. And
Yeah.
he's like, huh, well, if you do this and this, you could probably be pretty successful. If you ever need any help, let me know. I don't
All
know
right.
if you know Dr. Fox, but
Yeah.
that's just the way he is.
Yeah.
Like most encouraging dude ever. He probably doesn't remember that conversation
Probably
at
not.
all.
I remember him saying something once at a district pastor's training event where he's like, I'll probably get in trouble for this, but he's like, I really think that we've got it backwards. We put the most experienced pastors in these large churches where they pretty much run themselves. No offense to the churches, but they
Yep.
do. He's like, and then we take these little screwed up, he didn't say this, but my opinion, little screwed up small churches that have gotten off track on mission and vision and anything useful over
Need
the
a lot of
years.
skill.
And we put somebody with no
Yeah.
anything, no experience of any kind, and probably honestly a very lacking education in all the most critical areas. And we're like, here, good luck. These people won't eat you alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I think we should switch it around and give some of those seasoned guys a shot at the little churches and see if they remember anything. And he's like, I won't get invited back to speak here anymore, which is probably fine.
Yeah. No, so he was pretty encouraging, and then it took a little bit longer to hear back because evidently this church, like many small churches, they were church of about 60 at the time.
Okay.
They had some pretty rough financial things that they were working through. It was a part-time position, and they were deciding if they could afford it.
Okay.
And
so was this like the first time they actually were going to have a youth pastor on staff?
No, you actually probably know the guy who was there before me. His name's Joe Crosby.
Oh yeah, okay,
And, I think he's at Sandersville Church of the Nazarene in Georgia now.
Okay.
So if he's listening out there in the metaverse, what up, Joe?
Hey, Joe.
Don't think I've ever talked to you that much in person, but
yeah,
so Joe is out there.
Joe
and
was
he'd
a
done
class
great,
president one year of one of the whatever class it was in. So yeah,
and he'd done a great job at that church, and the youth group really loved him. And they're like, we see the value of what's happening here. We're going to fight to have this position continue. But we just don't know where the money's going to come from.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I'll just kind of hang out here in limbo because a bet's a bet. And so I started selling off all my possessions. I got down to 100 pounds of luggage because that's what I could fit into my bags and not have to pay extra
Because
for
if you
it.
got to be a backpacker on one of the mountains in
Yeah.
Hawaii to survive in this new youth pastor position.
And I remember coming down and seeing all my family here, being like, "Hey, so I'm probably moving to Hawaii. I don't know when, but
Yeah.
I made this bet with God, and I just
Oh,
know I'm
man.
going." And I went and saw family and saw all of my family. Said, "I'm probably going to be gone for a couple of years. I don't know when I'm
They're
going
like,
to see
they're
you."
like,
next."
did you kill someone?
They were
What
like,
happened? No,
"Okay,
worse. I'm
so
going to Hawaii.
so are you going to like apply for other jobs?" It's like, yeah. And so I remember getting to the point Memorial Day weekend where it's like, man, this is rough. It's not working out. And my best friend at the time, his wife had just left him, and he needed a roommate. Otherwise, he was going to lose his house. So it's like, okay,
Wow.
I'm in the Central Time Zone because I was in Tennessee at that point. It's like, I'm going to call them at 8 o'clock tonight, and I'm going to say thanks for considering me. I'm really doing the best I can to figure out where I'm supposed to be in this
Yeah.
faith journey, and maybe I'm just supposed to be a board member somewhere. And thanks, but I'm going to bow out gracefully from this process. 8 p.m. Central Time was when I was going to make the call. They called me at 7:30
No.
p.m. and because you don't want to call them at like 9 in the morning.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. They're like,
it's
why are you
super,
waking
like,
me
you
up?
came me out of bed to say you're yeah.
You got me out of bed to turn me down.
To
Okay,
turn me down.
thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate
There's
that,
gonna be
man.
a Taylor Swift song about that someday. But just
Funny
showing my
story.
age
I
there.
know a guy that dated Taylor Swift's best friend in Tennessee, and I don't even care. I don't even remember the song, but she wrote a lyric about this guy about how like so and she had this guy that she thought she'd be with forever, but he broke her heart or something. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's about him, like
Yeah.
straight up. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, but yeah, they called me and I was like, "You sure?" It's like, because I tried to get more qualified people to apply. Like somehow I beat out like 4 people for this job that definitely should have got it.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Yeah, no, just something about your application. It was different." Like, and just the raw honesty and
You were like playing like easy to get, and they're
Yeah.
like, we like this about this guy. We don't want all these people that are too
Yeah.
good for us.
we liked the fact that you didn't send us a picture of you in a suit and tie.
Right.
You sent a picture of you in board shorts. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, I guess
You're
I
in
can
Hawaii.
see
I
that.
figured it made sense.
And so it's funny because I was like, all right, well, what's the
Gonna
next
go
step?
suffer for Jesus in Hawaii.
They said,
Like literally, you probably felt like it was gonna be suffering. 'Cause
Yeah.
sand and beaches was
yeah,
really gonna
and
be.
the Big Island has a really large need. Like it's essentially a rainforest.
Mm,
And so the portion that I was going to is actually where the lava is like actively flowing.
Nice.
So like Paradise Park is a really beautiful place, but there's just a lot of chaos there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of need, a lot of homeless people, a lot of people that live in what most Americans would consider substandard housing.
Sure.
No power
Wow.
literally in
Yeah.
their house. Like they have generators, no water.
Like we were off grid before it was cool.
Yeah, so like they literally have to go to the water station to get drinking
Oh
water
my. Wow.
because
Yeah.
there's no plumbing on a volcanic rock. Can't
Yeah.
afford it. So like
Kind of difficult to drill through all
yeah,
that.
so like literally I remember driving to the lava tube to fill up these jugs of water for
Oh my goodness.
different things, and
Yeah.
we caught rainwater, but of course you can't drink that
Right.
because you're throwing bleach in it to make it usable for
Yeah.
anything. And so
Wow.
anyway, like I go out there and it's like, man, I know this is gonna be a lot of work, and I'm just afraid it's gonna be hot and it's gonna be gross, and there's gonna be sand everywhere. And so I fly out. It was actually during General Assembly here in Orlando.
Yeah.
And I remember passing GSs on the little conveyor belt thing. And
Nice.
it's like, I should probably remember this moment. This is significant. And so I jump on my plane, I fly out to Seattle, and I catch another flight out to Honolulu. And I get off the plane in Honolulu, and the terminal's open air.
Okay.
And it's 90 degrees. And there's sand
Oh
everywhere.
my goodness. You're like,
oh gosh.
you're like, is this what hell looks like?
Okay. Then so I jump on the next plane to go from Honolulu to Hilo, and I get off the plane, and it's one that you actually like got down on the tarmac,
Right.
like one of those old school from like
Yeah.
the 50s things.
Yeah.
And I look to one side, and I see the 13,000 foot peak, and I'd done some research, so this wasn't a total surprise, but it preaches
Sure.
a lot better when you act like it was. And I saw this 13,000 foot peak, And what's really interesting is it snowed in Hawaii that year before
Wow.
it snowed in Nashville.
Oh my goodness.
And Volcano is a town that's 15 minutes away from Keau, where I was living.
They just named the town Volcano?
Yeah, because it's where Volcano National Park is, and it's where the
Okay.
lava's
Yeah.
like
It's just like, what do we name this one?
yeah, Volcano.
Volcano. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a volcano.
Yeah, Volcano. And so right next to Mountain View.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
I'm wondering what you see out there.
yeah. So you know, I could be in 50-degree weather every single day.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, I can deal with that. And then I look to the other side and I see the coast. And this part I didn't look up. All I saw was lava rock.
Mm.
And there's
No
not
sandy
a,
beaches.
there's not a speck of indigenous white sand anywhere
Nice.
on the big island of Hawaii. The only place that there's a white sand beach is Hapuna Beach, where they actually bring the sand
They
in from Australia.
Barged it in.
And they
Yeah.
try to build this touristy area. So at the time that I lived there, I'm not sure if
Oh my
anything's
goodness.
changed. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, tangibly, God was like, well, how far are you willing to trust me?
Yeah.
Like, are you really willing to go anywhere, do anything? And I had to say, well, I begrudgingly said, a bet's a bet. And so I got out there and I realized that the kids in the group that I was with had a lot of struggle. They'd been through a lot of trauma. They'd been through, you know, tough parenting situations. And, you know, what they told me when I got there is like, the reason we hired you is because you had a story.
Mm.
We needed somebody with an edge.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so we saw all these other applicants, and like, it's not that they would have been wrong
Yeah.
for this position. It's just that we felt that your story was most right.
Mm.
And so, you know, I got out there and I just started emulating. And it's like, okay, so this is what Dave did, this is what Ron did, this is what Mike did. I'm going to kind of make my own spin on that. So it gets back to that unintentional mentoring thing,
Mm. Yeah.
where I didn't have theological training, but I had great pastors.
Sure.
You know, theological training came after.
Yeah.
But because I had great Sunday school teachers like Mr. Herschel, who gives me a pocket knife and gets me interested in reading the Bible, because I did Bible quizzing, because I did all the different programming and the discipleship methods that the lay people of our church really ran, and I had great youth pastors that could really enhance the work that the lay people were doing, I got out there, and ministry was difficult, but it wasn't hard.
Yeah.
And
so like you're learning stuff that you actually hadn't even had schooling for.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
pre-law.
you weren't in school in any way. You didn't even have any like ministry training classes outside of college. I'm guessing for
I
youth
had
ministry.
4 classes at Tribeca, and those are just their
The
gen
ones that
eds.
everybody has to take.
Yeah, so I had Intro to Biblical Faith with Dan
Yeah.
Spross, who's
Right.
against it, because
Yeah.
that dude is
Dude,
difficult.
I mean, taking a required course, you know, not in your major with Dan Spross is an intimidating thing for people that don't know Dan Spross. What a cool guy, and I love every minute of class that I had with him. But he is hard, and he even told us, he's like, you think this is difficult, and then he goes in this like uphill both ways to school 10 miles story, like how it was when he was first teaching. He's like, I used to make them do this, this, and this, and it's like, I don't care, that sounds terrible, but this is hard too, man.
Yeah. When he
But
spoke in
what a
7
guy.
languages, 1 class period,
Oh
I
my
was like,
goodness.
oh man.
We're in
No
for
wonder
it.
I don't want to be a religion major.
Yeah. We're in for
And so then after that, I had Steve Hoskins for Christian Traditions.
it.
Yeah, there it is.
Steve Hoskins, man, I
He
love
and
that
bow
guy.
ties.
Bow ties, man. The bow ties,
Yep.
like, and the thing I loved about Steve Hoskins was he'd have all these like, you know, wide-eyed young Nazarene students from, you know, all over the region, and he had grown up on this region and like was in their PR groups singing, their traveling groups that would sing at different churches, and so like during his college years, he's going to all these churches all over the Southeast, little small churches all over the place.
Knew them all.
And so you'd have these kids in class. He's like, "Where are you from?" They're like, "Oh, it's this small town in South Carolina." He's like,
Try me.
"Yeah, try me." Like, and so they would say it, and he's like, "Which church do you go to? Is it this one or this one?" And they're like, "It's that one." He's like, "Does Mrs. So and so still go there?" You know, yeah, she's still alive. Yeah, she makes the best fried chicken or whatever. And it's like, what? And then you realize later, like, oh, when he traveled with the PR groups, that was in the day when they're like, they would stay in people's homes. These people give him hospitality, and so of course he's gonna know some people. And it's like, what a rich just experience for a few years there of like, you know, getting to travel around and now, I mean, like, I'm part of the problem, I know it, but we won't even open our house up for a neighbor to come in, let alone our best friends to come over and have dinner. We'll meet at a restaurant. It's like Sunday dinner, setting the timer for a roast on the oven. We don't do that. It was just, Sonny's or Plaza Mexico is right down the street around the corner from the church. It's easier to just go there. And it is easier.
Yeah.
And as a side note, like breaking the fourth wall, if you go to a restaurant and you come from church or just anytime, you better tip extra good and be nice and polite. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. Anytime we talk about church restaurants, I'm like, I was preaching that when I was a teenager. And my friends would be like, I don't have any money, so can you just bring me a water? And then they would keep refilling that water. I'm like, you better at least leave her $1. Like she filled your cup with water 15 times. You made her work. Just because the water is free doesn't mean her service wasn't, $1 is an insult, but at least leave something. So they're like, what? Yeah, if you were going to hang out in a restaurant,
you're
paying for
money.
that, And so people are like, oh, everybody should be in the service industry for a while, in the restaurant industry. I'm like, I don't know. I never was, and I've got a pretty good grasp of how to be nice to people. But like, I get it. So Steve Hoskins was fun, man. And that hospitality that used to be so prevalent in Christian, in the world in general, but especially in Christian circles, I think we've lost a lot of that. We've kind of gotten off touch with it, and honestly, I don't know how. I mean, it's a generational thing on a lot of ways, and I don't know how to kick that back into the forefront of our lifestyle. But that might be something that the church can offer the world, because it is in our DNA. It's in our scriptures. It's in the Bible about practicing hospitality and
direct
direct instruction there. And it's like we're like so out of practice on it, but we can get back into practice. And so it's like, do those things, because those are some of the ways we might be able to reach people that they're hurting. Your kids, whether it was in Hawaii in the youth group there or wherever it is, there's people that are hurting, and there's people that don't have family, and the family they do have is terrible. And if we can offer them a little slice of what it means to be part of the family of God, and the eternal implications of that, we might see some more effective days in church ministry again that have been lacking. So we started talking about embracing, technology and things like that. But there's some really simple, ancient stuff that doesn't really cost you anything. How many times have you thrown away leftovers or food that you cooked too much and didn't eat all of it? And it's like, what if you just started inviting people over? Use Facebook. Say, hey, I've got enough food for 3 more people. The first 3 that show up, dinner's ready in 20 minutes. Come to my house. I would literally do that if it wasn't for my wife and kid being so like, I mean, you walked through my house earlier, my daughter hiding behind the furniture, like, and she's not even really scared of people. She just acts like she is. I don't understand it, but she's 5, so it's okay. But it's like, I'm the kind of guy that would, like, if I see a homeless guy walking down the road, I'm like, hey, you want to come inside? But I'm like, I've got a family. I should probably think about their safety and well-being. But like, if I was just still like, if I was a single guy at this age, I'd be like, hey, come on over, like crash on the couch, watch some TV, eat my food. Like, I just like cooking food and watching people enjoy eating it.
Well,
it's one of my favorite things.
The 2 of us in our marriage, it's really hard to cook 2 people meals.
It is.
So, leftovers, they're great, but it's one of those things.
Especially that leftover pulled pork from lunches. Oh, man.
Yeah, the chicken was pretty good too.
Dude, that chicken was straight fire.
I think I'm flying to Indiana, for those of you who are watching. But so tomorrow I think I'm going to take the chicken and I'm going to put it in a Ziploc bag and have it in my carry-on. I'm just going to bust that out on the airplane.
They will stop you at TSA and scan it and check it.
But they'll let you pass.
But they'll let you pass. It's just going to be a hassle to get through.
Yeah.
I did that with my grandma's. It was like a zucchini bread, and it was wrapped up in foil, and it was in my carry-on. And I'm like, it got flagged. I'm like, how in the world? Like, it can sense organic composition or whatever. Like, yeah, there's something organic in your pack. I'm like, yeah, it's my grandma's zucchini bread. It's wrapped in foil. Like, I promise there's nothing nefarious about it. And they passed it through. I'm like, I will eat that whole thing right here. Like, my grandma made that for me, and she's not going to be around much longer. I'm eating this.
I have gotten a steak through before.
So.
Yeah. So I was on vacation to Lake Tahoe last year. There's a condo that the Sacramento district has.
Okay.
It's beautiful. And so we just went. They had a grill at the condo. And it's like, sweet, we're just going to make food this week, and we're not going to eat out. We're going to go hike, and we're going to brown bag it and all that stuff because, we're not exactly what you would call well-to-do people. So, but
Humble servants of the
but the
church.
the New York strip was $6 a pound, and it's like,
Dude,
I'm not
what?
buying this.
$6 a pound for New York strip. I'm gonna
Yeah.
buy a lot of that.
So I bought everything I could, and so I guess what we're having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, D?
Steak,
New
steak,
York
steak.
strip. And so
Dude, yeah.
I ended up having 2 left, and it's like,
I'm taking this.
taking this. And
Yeah.
so in the Reno airport, there's a picture of me that Deanna took where I'm just eating it out of the bag, and it's kind of like, those like those Flintstones push pop ice cream
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
I kind of felt like I was eating one of those, only with a steak.
Because you didn't have like a plate, knife,
No,
nothing.
I
Just, I firmly believe that.
the New York strip's perfect for that.
Oh yeah, I firmly believe that meat in specific is meant to be eaten with your hands.
Yep.
Like I'm civilized and I will, but there's to me nothing better than like a steak or a pork chop that I just pick
Yeah,
up and
I
take
kept my
bites
pinky
of.
up while
Yeah,
I was
oh
eating,
yeah, of
so,
course. I mean,
'cause we're classy.
I'm not uncultured swine,
Yeah.
but yeah. I mean, if you're at a cookout, I feel like it's fair game, and I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
using a fork or a knife for it.
No.
I will pick that up with my hands and eat it. If it's at a barbecue and I'm eating outside, I'm eating with my fingers.
Yep.
It's just how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but man,
Sitting in an airport.
eating that cold steak in the Reno airport, it
man.
was delicious.
Of course.
I had some people, and this is of course, the height of masking and COVID
Oh,
and all
right.
that stuff. So I'm taking my mask off and I'm eating
Yeah.
steak, and I have people looking at me like, respect.
Respect, yeah, absolutely. Every now and then you see somebody that's just like so like like the world just seems to have stopped around them and they're just living in their own little slice of it and they're like, I don't care, this is me.
Yep.
Like you wish you were this cool,
Yep.
I remember going to Ichthus Christian Music Festival in Wilmore,
Yep.
Kentucky,
Oh, man.
over by Asbury University, and I would go there. We'd go there as a teenager, and then when I was college age, I would go as like an adult chaperone with the group. And you're camping in tents, you're going inside the festival grounds for all this music all day. Well, they had these showers, and they had this push button, and it would last for 3 to 7 seconds. I don't know how they could only get it, 3, but it's like, and it's just the mist thing, so it's not
Yeah.
even that much water. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, so everybody's just sitting there like holding their one hand on the shower and like trying to wash with the other hand, and I'm like, this is dumb. And I don't mind camping, but I hate being nasty smelling.
Yep.
Like even as a teenager, I was like, I'm not living that
Yeah.
life, And so I got to looking at it, and the little push button, the diameter of it and the diameter of like the piece of metal behind it was the same. And I was like, well, this is simple. Next year, I brought like this rubber hose that I had sliced in half, and I brought 2 hose clamps and a screwdriver.
Yeah.
And I would clamp it at the wall, and I'd push the button and clamp it there, and it would hold itself on.
Yeah.
And so then, to further my my own way of living, there was like a handicap stall. Legally, they had to have it, but there was like nobody using it.
Yeah.
And it didn't have a shower curtain either, and that's why I'm like, we're all, well, not all grown men, but I didn't even care. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, there's a line
Different
of dudes
time.
out here, and I'm like, whatever. And I would just walk past all of them, set up my contraption. I've got my shower for pretty much as long as I want,
Yeah.
and that was my thing. And guys are like, what is he? You know what? I'm doing that too.
Yeah.
Like, and so it's so if I ever see somebody eating
Yeah.
a steak in an airport, I'll know like, BJ started that, man. Like, that is your trend that
Yep.
you got going.
Yeah. Hey, I'll live into that. for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. If that's the last thing you can leave the world, like, leave them with, a little better life, an example of following Christ and eating New York strips in an airport. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't
Cold.
get much better than that. Cold. Who cares? No judgment. As long as it's, cooked,
Yeah.
not overcooked.
No,
like
not
you
overcooked.
can't overcook a New York
No,
strip, man.
that'd
That's
be-
not okay. That's sacrilegious, I
Yeah,
think.
that'd just be wrong.
I've said certain times I'll be like, I'll see something that's not right. I'll be like, Jesus didn't die for you to do that.
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
I'm not saying he died for you not to do that, but I guarantee he didn't die for you to overcook, like do a well done steak. My dad, he would always eat like well done red meats, and he'd order a prime rib. He's like, well done. I'm like, how do you eat a well done prime rib? I don't get that.
I don't even think you can make it legally in most states.
I'm sure the chef spit on it. Like they're like, no way. That's
a
ruining
shop
it.
thing, though.
Yeah,
Like I really do because
could be.
because I think that the food industry, I've been, out of my weird things I enjoy, I've been watching the show called "The Food That Built America."
Oh
on
yeah,
History Channel.
I haven't seen much of that, but I'm familiar with it. Yeah,
And so like I don't doubt that the spoilage problem
right.
caused a lot of our
Oh,
parents
yeah.
and their parents to be
Yeah.
like, you gotta make sure that all the germs are dead on this thing because you don't actually know how old that is.
Well, and we would put like I mean, I was a sack lunch kid at school, and we
Yeah.
would put like cold cuts, and mayonnaise and mustard and cheese on like that nasty white bread that like,
Hmm.
is still, I'm pretty sure it's still stuck to the roof of my mouth.
Yeah.
And and that would go in a brown paper sack that my mom would put together at like what, 8 a.m. or
Yeah.
something, and we're eating at probably 11:30. And I know that's not food safe laws. Like whatever their
Yeah.
rules are, I'm like, nah, probably not. Like the mayonnaise thing for 4 hours probably is where it gets you, but hey, we're
Yeah.
in an air conditioned building, so it can't be all bad.
Yeah.
But you know what? I don't remember getting sick from it.
Nope.
And I
Yeah.
remember a buddy of mine that I worked with, we had ordered a Little Caesars pizza because we had them all the time back
Yeah.
then. We would do a pizza at least 4 days a week
Yeah.
and probably ramen noodles on the other day.
Yeah.
And so that was our life there. And so we would just get these $5 larges, and there was some left over that was just sitting out on the counter in the
Yeah.
box. And then the next day he like picks up a
Breakfast.
slice. I'm
Yeah.
like, whoa, dude, we didn't refrigerate that. He's like, "Pfft, dude, I used to like be at my friend's house and I would drink all night and there'd be a pizza and I'd wake up the next day and it's there and I'd just start eating it and I never got sick from that. So I figure I'm good now. I'm like, okay. And so I just start eating it
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, maybe what my mom taught me wasn't 100% true. Like there's some fudging on some of these rules you can do, and so I'm like, I'm not gonna worry about it too much. And I've also left the coffee creamer out for a couple days at a time. Like at the church, somebody forgot it, and I'm like, I'll give it a test run and see. And it's not dairy, it's
Yeah.
soy based. And
Yeah.
I drank some. I'm like, I never got sick out of it, and either I've got an iron stomach or it's fine. And
Yeah.
so
It's
I
not
just
like it's half
I
and
put it
half.
back out. Yeah, if it's half and half, I'm not
That's
messing
a
with
little
that.
different.
I'm not messing with that. But it's like the coffee
Yeah.
creamer, like Coffee Mate and International Delight, you can leave those out for a good few days
Yeah.
in the 80-degree classroom with no air conditioning running throughout the week.
Yep.
It'll survive. So feel free to take my food safety advice and test it and use it however you want.
Hey, I can tell you for a fact, a steak in a bag all day.
Oh
'Cause
yeah,
I had
I'm
two. I
all
ate
over
one
it.
in Reno, and then I ate one in Vegas. Because again,
You're
pinkies
you're
up.
spreading the good news of cold steak consumption at multiple points on your
Cold and
journey.
lukewarm, I guess you'd have to say.
Yeah, yeah. I left a pretty good chunk of pizza in a hotel room in Kansas City once, and now I'm regretting that because I could have definitely brought that with me on the plane and
Yeah.
started eating it. With this knowledge that you dropped on me,
Yeah.
I was with my buddy Ryan, that was my mentor, and we had flown together to uh, preachers conference in
Yep.
Kansas City in I think 2015, and he and I were both here. He was over in St. Cloud Church over by Kissimmee, Orlando
Yep.
area, and so he's like, hey, let's go. And I'm like, well, if I'll drive to your house the next morning. We can, I'll sleep there overnight. The next morning we'll go up to Orlando airport and fly out together,
Yeah.
and do it that way. He's like, okay, sounds good. And so we, shared a hotel room and a rental car and all that stuff. Well, we were looking for a pizza one night, and I'm looking through like on my phone, looking at pizza places, and there's this one, and it said Chicago style deep dish. I'm like, oh, do you want Chicago deep dish? He's like, I've never had it. I'm like, what? Okay. And this is a
Yeah.
dude, he loves food, like seriously.
Yeah.
And so and he owned a pizza restaurant in Springfield, Tennessee for a while and all this stuff. And, just never had Chicago deep dish. I'm like, how
That's
have
hard to
you
believe.
avoided this? Okay. So we got it. And I was like, let's just do a medium. And they're like, okay. And so they, I pay for it, over the phone or whatever. And they're going to deliver it to this hotel. And he's like, are you sure a medium's enough? I'm like, if we eat this whole thing, like, I don't know what I bet him, but it's like, I will do whatever,
You'll regret it on the flight tomorrow.
Yeah. So we ate half of it and we were hurting, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just a medium, but you know how thick they are.
Oh yeah.
And so we
Yep.
left it in the little fridge there in the hotel because it's like, we should have carried that. I'm really regretting it now.
Yeah.
Because that was a solid, 5 pounds of pizza probably that we should have taken
Yep.
home. So I have so many regrets at this point because I haven't carried as much food on an airplane as I should
Yeah,
have.
it's kind of a challenge. I mean, I've done Subway sandwiches, I've done all kinds.
That just doesn't feel worth
It's not the
worth
same as a steak or
it doesn't feel
pizza.
worth the wait at the
Yeah.
at the pre or TSA thing,
Yeah.
So
So,
yeah. Oh man. Well, I can't think of too much else. I mean, we could get into some really nerdy theological stuff, but I don't want to bore anybody with that. But one of the things, maybe the last thing I want to talk with you about right now that I can think of for the purpose of this podcast is talking about something. I think probably the first time you and I had talked it when I was down here, because I know your brother Tim, but I
Right.
don't think I'd ever
Yeah.
met you in Tennessee that I remember anyway.
I flew way under that radar
Yeah,
in Tribeca.
yeah,
People were always like, "Wow, you're related?" It's like,
yeah.
yeah,
And Tim was actually like one of the first people I met too, because
legend.
yeah, absolutely. My
Yeah.
buddy Aaron was from Flint, and he was going to school at Tribeca, and then he had. I don't think they were in the same suite, but they were on the same floor. They're both freshmen. They're at the Benson dorm at
Mhm.
Tribeca, which is just fourth floor, freshman floor
Yeah.
is just an
I
insane.
skipped it. I
Ooh,
went straight
man.
to first floor.
I didn't I never lived on campus. I actually bought a
Right.
house before I started school there. And so then like somebody in admissions was like, did you think to clear that with us first? Because every freshman has to live on campus unless they are like with family. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I own my own house. I wasn't 18. Like I skipped
Yeah.
3 years before coming to college. So I'm like, I'm a grown
Not an
adult.
average freshman.
I owned a
Yeah.
lawn business in Michigan and was responsible for
Yeah.
managing that. Had my own house that I rented. Like I'm not
Yeah.
coming to live in a dorm,
Yeah.
you know.
And it's just policy stuff.
And it was policy, but
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
just funny the way she phrased the question. Like, did you even think to ask us? I'm like, literally no, literally I
Yeah.
did not think to ask you.
Yeah.
But anyway, so like it just wasn't on my mind. So my buddy Aaron was living there, and Tim was always hanging out, and of course they were like bonding over like common history of living in Flint,
Yeah.
Flint area, and Red Wings fans, of course, you
Yeah.
know, and you know, I mean, I learned to appreciate watching Nashville play hockey, but
Yeah.
when Red Wings were in town
Different
playing,
game.
we were wearing Red Wings jerseys,
Yep.
you know, which was very like you take your life in your own hands, especially at a playoffs game if you're wearing a Red Wings jersey,
Yeah.
you know,
It's not quite that way
at the
now,
Lightning, or
but
that's Tampa,
yeah.
Predators.
Nashville,
Sorry, yeah. Um, and Nashville has I mean that's fun hockey. It really is.
Oh yeah.
Like
They're much better than the Red Wings
oh,
product right now.
yeah, but I mean, the
Yeah.
live game, like watching,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
being there in person, it's just fantastic. It's a good experience. But yeah, I remember Tim from there. I don't even why were we talking about that? I don't even know why I started talking about Tim.
I
But
just
legendary.
didn't know me.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, because oh no, so it was so I was talking about meeting you. So I hadn't met you around Tribeca that I remember, but I met you actually down here
Yeah.
in Zephyr Hills, and I remember a conversation that we had was about, you were saying, hey, the churches need to be almost bivocational like pastors
Yeah.
are. The church needs to be, yeah, and co-vocational is the term now these days that I really resonate with a lot more,
Yeah.
because it's like we have kind of really one vocation, and that's doing whatever God's
Yeah.
called us to do. And sometimes that involves spending your time in a different environment that you might get a paycheck from,
Yeah.
another job, but the vocation is still the same. The purpose is still the same.
Yeah.
And so churches need to have basically like a secondary income stream, and that
Yeah.
might also provide a missional opportunity.
Yeah.
So like this church, we operate a child care center with pre-K and then before and after school care for our elementary school kids. And so we run like 2 van loads of kids to one school and 2 van loads to the other school. And when I got here, it was like they had a little, like, not even the extended Voyager, like the Plymouth Voyager, the short van with the one window that wouldn't roll down,
Yep.
and the non-working air conditioner. So you roll down one window and that's it. That's what you get.
Yep.
And so this is just a pitiful van, and we sold it for $600, and I felt horrible charging that much.
I was gonna say
like
that's
it was,
doing well.
yeah. And so, well, those things, like your family's had a couple,
Yep.
like those things just hardly die unless you roll them over or something like that. But anyway,
Yeah.
sorry.
I
So,
didn't do that, just in case anybody. I won't throw anyone under the bus. But, it
but
was not
somebody may have done
Not
that. But anyway, so that's grown really well, and we've had a couple church folks, a couple of our staff members have worked at the daycare at times too, and we try to have a ministry to the families there, but also we started working on it where it was actually just profitable at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yeah.
And that has allowed us to do a lot of things, both in repairing just deferred maintenance, or in non-building code speak, that's buildings that are falling apart or
Yeah.
threatening to,
Mhm.
or just ancient, like we had carpet in the gymnasium that was from 1986,
Yeah.
and it's like we just tore that out last year. But
For
the
reference,
daycare,
I was born in 1987.
So it's carpet older than you.
36-year-old.
And yeah, like, wow. Okay. I just had an image, but I was like, no, I'm not going to use that one. But can you imagine all the spills and messes that
Yep.
land on
Yep.
carpet in a multi-purpose building where we started feeding
Generationally.
daycare kids?
Yeah.
You know, and they're spilling stuff left and
Yeah.
right, and we're
Yeah.
like, that's probably fine. So when we started serving breakfast there and they had milk and it started spilling,
Yep.
ooh, nasty. So the daycare has been able to massively assist or in whole part pay for many of those upgrades we've done.
Yeah.
And at the same time offering us missional opportunities that we otherwise might not have.
Right.
So what are some other things that you think that churches can or should be doing, or what are some ways that we can creatively think about, you know, if you're like, well, we don't want to run a school and we don't want to do this or that, how can somebody start thinking about what could we do?
Yeah. Man, that's a loaded question.
I know, and I apologize, but you can handle it.
Well, so for context, I think that our conversation all those years ago happened. I think I was here to speak for Faith Promise.
Yeah.
And you know, the intention was to talk about Hawaii, but I actually talked a lot more about Shelterwood, which is the boarding school that I worked at, where I was a live-in mentor for troubled teenagers, and ended up becoming one of the directors there for 5.5 years. And simultaneously with that, I was a part-time youth pastor in a United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
And the reality is, when people think of kids in like group home settings and like what would be called an alternative school, is you think of juvenile delinquency.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always that. So we had some kids that were avoiding, you know, juvenile detention, and we were a type of diversion treatment for them instead of having to go to juvenile facilities. But more often than not, we had kids that were dealing with trauma, and we had kids that were needing therapy, and they were needing, you know, just extra help to where they could be at home. So that was kind of my story at that time. Is I had this theory. It's like, okay, so I'm working at this boarding school with these really awesome kids who look just like every kid in every youth group in America, and they've been labeled as problems. And when you live into a label, it tends to define who your future can become. So my theory was,
hold on there a second. When you live into a label, it tends to define
the future.
Yeah, and that can be very negative for many years before you finally figure out how to climb your way out of that, or maybe never do.
Yeah. And so it's actually critical that in that boarding school type of environment, or in any environment, struggling kids, that you find ways to bring them back into places where they can get new labels, where it's like, no, you're not a problem, you're beloved. You belong here. And so I had this theory, and as I told the church, it's like, hey, I'd really like to start bringing some of my group home kids here. I'll be selective. They're going to be kids that already, you know, have some sort of faith background, but I think you'll be shocked that you won't even know the difference between the students that we have on our campus already and the students that come in from the school. And so, like, we had kids from the alternative school, like ushering and running sound and doing all kinds of stuff. And they were thrilled.
So you actually, was it just like a courtesy thing, or were you actually like, you kind of had to ask for permission to do that?
It was courtesy.
It's just courtesy,
You know,
just kind of letting you know, like, hey, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
These kids aren't like going to start running around being
don't
insane.
worry. Like, these
it was
are
more like along those lines.
It's more of like, you know, and my boss at the time, he came out and spoke at the chapel for us, so he got it. But there were some where it was like, oh, well, that's kind of scary. And then we had a couple of kids from our actual youth group in different alternative schools. It's like, so, hey, guess what? You know, we already have this group, so let's minister to them. And they found a place to belong. And what actually happened was, through two jobs that couldn't support me on their own, I had two jobs that were the same mission. And
hence the co-vocational kind of thing.
Co-vocationality, I
like
realized.
Like cooperative vocations.
Yeah, so, because a lot of times it's bivocational, and I think I was talking with your dad about this yesterday. Bivocational, the connotation would be like, so I'm a real estate agent by day, and I'm a pastor in the evenings and on Sundays and that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
And you can even find a way to use that career to help people get into housing they can afford. And,
like it can be a very noble thing. It can be a very beneficial thing. But I think for so long when we use the term bivocational. It was almost like,
Separate.
well, I work at a church in ministry as a pastor,
Yeah.
but they can't afford to or won't or whatever pay me what I
Yeah.
need to live off of or want to live off of, so I have to do this other thing.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I fell into that trap of thinking of it that way for so long. My first congregation before this one, they had provided a house and the utilities, and it was a cool house too. Like, we missed that house, and a great neighborhood, but there was zero income ever. I didn't have mileage reimbursements. There wasn't a reimbursement for a library of book, to buy books or to go to conferences or anything. We were on our own for all this stuff. And so I was like, well, I have to have another job to survive, which was true. But I didn't look at that job as a missional opportunity to accompany what I was doing there in the church. And I think a lot of church planting folks get this, like, just instinctively or intuitively almost. They're like, well, I can go work like as a barista and talk to a ton of people or something like that. And same thing with the realtor. I mean, any job that gets you in front of people and gives you opportunity for a conversation can coordinate very well with whatever your ministry role is.
Yeah, when I was in Hawaii, I was coach. So I coached basketball and football.
Sure.
I also did some real estate stuff. I was working 7 jobs at the same time just to be able to eat.
I think I've only done 3 to 4, so that's good.
Yeah,
good
so,
job.
the hustle.
Well, and eating in Hawaii isn't cheap, right?
Yeah,
like,
Captain Crunch was $9 a box when I was there. So I mostly ate
cornflakes.
Well, I mostly ate food pantry food that our church had, and I'd eat basically
They
one
got you
meal a
like
day.
squirreled away in the food pantry,
Yeah.
like.
I lived in the garage, and my bedroom became the youth room, and that's a whole other story. But the pastor didn't love that the youth room was right under his bedroom, so we had some good times. But anyway, so the idea that church has changed, and church in America in particular is changing, because I actually think that the cost of being a part-time pastor is often greater than the cost of being a full-time pastor. And I'm blessed now at this point to where God's called me to full-time work at Mustang, but I also remember all of the things that have gone into that. So it's like, okay, so how do I take this job, even this full-time pastorate job, and make it co-vocational, where it's like, okay, we have all of these kids that are coming out of SNU that need mentorship.
Yeah.
So Mustang is one of the most sought-after internships in the program, because it's like, so I don't get paid for this. God's providing for my needs over here. This is the conduit through which God is providing for me. So now I'm going to minister to this group of people, and then I'm also going to bring these ones in and make this be a mentoring church.
Yeah.
To where, we have 6 interns through the theology of ministry program at SNU, and they have 40 in the program.
Oh my goodness.
And we're a mid-sized church for Nazarene standards.
Yeah.
We're a fairly large church on our district.
Sure.
But we have a huge chunk of this program, because it's like, I don't get paid for this, but I'm on campus recruiting it like college football coach. Yeah. Because I'm like, hey, guess what? You're going into ministry. It's going to be very hard. I started off like grinding. I don't want you to have to learn all the lessons the way I did. So now I'm going to pour in this way. And so I take this gift that I have, and now I can use it to help enhance these people. And I think that that's really what church is becoming, is it's like, how do you take the resources that God has entrusted you with, and how do you maximize them? Yeah. So, like, if my ability now is to teach young pastors how to avoid the mistakes that I made a ton of through lack of training and lack of coaching, that sort of thing. And there are gaps in any college program where it's like, they don't teach you how to do crisis intervention.
Oh, for sure.
They don't teach you how to talk to a parent that's been, talk to a parent whose son or daughter has been self-harming, and you're the one who found out. And they don't tell you a lot of things about how to do things in church.
There's so much. And then not only that, but the way certain things are shifting and changing in the world. Yeah. They can't. I mean, there's no way to be ahead of the curve enough on being able to devise a teaching curriculum and a program and teach them, because before you know it, that's already obsolete. And then the next like dramatic shift in culture is happening. You're like, whoa, okay, like, I mean, whether it's something crazy like an app like Tinder or something like that, we're like, whoa, we knew people were screwing around, but we didn't realize just how bad it was going to turn with that, or whatever it is. And so it's like, okay, like, that's where we've got to learn on the fly. But you're right, there's so much that if we could just start people out a little better footing on, like what they're going to encounter in ministry, we should be doing that.
And even having a phone number to say, I'm about to screw up.
Yeah.
How do I fix it?
I've had a couple people that I know that I can call,
Yeah.
in the time that I've been here, I was like, okay, like they didn't prepare me for this. What do I do?
Yeah.
I've even had some situations recently that I'm like, oh, okay, I thought I was done with like new shockers,
Yeah.
and it's like, nope, don't have all the experience
Yeah.
yet. It's like, oh my goodness, okay, not another one, not another
Yeah.
one.
And I think that's one that people in a full-time position, they'd be like, well, I'm not going to be co-vocational because I'm
Yeah,
already in one place. It's like, maybe God wants you to think a little more creatively. So like, how do you empower people that are trying to do the same thing,
yeah,
but maybe don't have the same resources, get them connected, and then raise up leaders, and then make yourself obsolete where you're at, and you redo something else, and you
yeah,
keep growing through that. So, but the other thing that I think is really interesting with what I'm sure our conversation had was how do you meet a specific need in the
yeah,
community in a way that will be noticeable if you're not meeting it.
right,
So like your daycare and even your
yeah,
lawn business,
yeah,
where it's like you have these resources, you're maximizing for the kingdom. I never once saw Jesus say in his parables, "Go become a pastor."
mm-hmm,
But in the parable of the talents, the only person in the parable of the talents that Jesus said that the father was frustrated with was the one who didn't maximize what he had.
yeah.
And so I happen to believe that the one talent servant, if he'd come back and just given any effort, basically, he would have said, "Well done."
Even if he had given some
Yeah,
effort and failed,
yeah.
he's like, Master,
Thanks for
I
trying.
did everything I could and
Yeah,
lost that talent. He's like, all right, you did something.
yeah,
Like that was what I wanted you to do.
yeah,
And for that matter, I'm willing to pay you to fail if you
yeah,
tried your best and learned a good lesson in that
yeah,
failure. Like if you learned what not to do, great. That is
yeah,
valuable knowledge.
yeah,
And so, I look at the church.
yeah,
I was actually a guest on another podcast the other day called, it hasn't hit the air yet. He hasn't produced it yet, but it's called The Nomad Pastor.
yeah,
And I was a guest on his show. And, he's like, what's one thing that you think the church needs to do or embrace today? And I was like, "Whew, man, there's probably a couple." And I said, but if I had to narrow it to one, I'd love to see the church get a willingness to experiment,
yeah,
and that means a willingness to what some might call a failure, but
yeah,
it's really not failing if it's an experiment, because an
yeah,
experiment is create a hypothesis, test it. If the test comes back where it doesn't work,
yeah,
then you completed that experiment,
yeah,
and you know not to do that thing that way again. Just like the light bulb with
yeah,
Edison, whatever it was, 10,000 ways not to create a light bulb or whatever the actual
yeah,
quote was. And it's like, we've tried a lot of stuff here.
yeah,
Before COVID and then during and after, where it's like, well, let's give this a shot and see if this is a way that we can reach some folks. And when that didn't work, we tried something
yeah,
else. I mean, I tried years ago. We tried to do like a generational Wednesday night service where we actually combined all ages, kids, teens, and
yeah,
adults together. Started out in the sanctuary, and this wasn't anything revolutionary or
sure.
necessarily new, but it was like, let's spend 30 minutes together
Let's
where
be
we
intentional.
sing and pray and have one small teaching point that hits everyone, and then from there we'll break off into age
Yep,
groups.
yep,
And it was actually frustrating at the time because there were several of our older folks that I know are praying for their grandchildren, that somebody will reach them for Christ because they don't seem to be able to. And yet they would actually just go and come in and sit in their classroom and wait
yep,
until the teacher was there when the group
yep,
time was over. I'm like, no, this isn't optional. So we ended up shutting down the whole
yep,
program. You can say it was out of spite, but it was honestly like, I just had this moment where I'm like,
yep,
I'm not doing this. I am not rewarding that bad
yep,
behavior. So
yep,
we don't have an adult Wednesday night program anymore.
yep,
We don't have I have a midweek Bible study during the daytime because my folks that can't see at night to
sure.
drive, it gives them that opportunity to be there. And we enjoy that time together, and
Yep,
it's good. But I'm like, I'm not rewarding what's honestly what was bad behavior,
yep,
because we had an opportunity to impact a generation, and instead they're like, I'd rather just sit in my classroom and shoot the breeze for 15
yeah.
minutes.
Well, and that is a
And it was
misconception,
frustrating.
is that, I've never encountered generations truly not enjoying being together
Yeah.
when they meet on common terms
Yeah.
and when they just share life. You know, there may be parts of the service that they wouldn't enjoy. Like, you know, whenever I have the youth band play, for example, they always learn and sing hymns.
Yeah.
So because what I explain to them is, you know, these are songs that people have been saved to. These are
Mm-hmm.
generational songs that have history and they matter.
Yeah.
And then when I work with some of our more experienced people, um, I tell them, just as I am is your generational
Mm-hmm.
song, Living Hope might be this one's
Yeah.
generational song.
Yeah.
Think of all the people that will be saved to this song
That's
if we're
good.
faithful.
That's
And if
good.
we embrace each other's songs and we don't have our songs and their songs, we just have
There are
our
songs. Yeah.
songs.
And we
So,
did some of that. We would
yeah,
actually sing songs that were like geared to, and these were all led by videos. We did have
yeah.
like one guy that would like play guitar with them, but he wasn't like a lead guitar,
But if you had
guy. But
worshiptutorials.com,
ah, yeah. So nice plug in there again. You don't own any stock there, do you?
nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The only
You
thing
just
I
like
do,
it that
the
much.
only thing I do is buy some of their products every
Yep.
now and then.
Yep. But we would do like like one or two that were geared towards the kids. They're
Yep,
from some kids group. We would do some youth songs that they loved, and
yep,
then do a hymn or two or something
yep,
older. And so we actually had a blend for everyone,
yep,
and it wasn't like just trying to be blended, quote unquote. It was just like let's touch everyone's thing that's gonna resonate with them,
yep,
and hopefully learn from each other.
yep.
And so to be fair, like I said, there was a few folks that were kind
Oh,
of
sure.
frustrated with it, but we had some folks that really embraced it and
Yeah,
loved it too. And actually some of the most ardent supporters of that literally moved on, like they moved to a different state.
right. Yeah,
We had a couple others that something changed in their life and they weren't able to make it anymore. So
yeah,
at that point, it was like we didn't really have much of a
yeah,
quorum to do that, and so that's kind of really why it fizzled. But I'm like, I'm not going to try to kick this back up again if
yeah.
this is the attitude that goes on.
Well, and if it's just something else that needs to happen,
There's
you know.
that aspect of
Yeah,
it.
and that's where,
And I never wanted to be
yeah,
like I won't keep stuff. I won't get rid of it just because it's something traditional.
yeah,
Like I'm not gonna just cut traditions just for the sake of traditions. But if that's all it
yeah,
is a tradition, and it's actually more like work for everyone
yeah,
involved, and if people are coming begrudgingly to it, and if I don't want to, I mean, a Sunday night service is like that
yeah,
for me. I did them for a time. Nobody asked me to, but I said we're gonna do this again at least during this winter time,
yeah,
and I had an actual like an evangelistic purpose to it. It was actually going to be kind of like an ongoing encouragement and
yeah,
training for like where do you see God at work in your
yeah,
sphere of influence? Where we had a little time in the Word. Where do you see Christ in the Word? Like we would do a little Bible study, and then how are you going to carry Christ to your world
yeah,
today, this week?
yeah,
And I was actually trying to come up with like um, not homework, but like specific, like here's how here's we talked about your person, your
yeah,
people, and so here's maybe some touch points you have with them where you can connect them to Christ through the Word that we've learned,
yeah.
and that degraded over time,
This
and it just
newfangled
got to where I
thing,
was like Sunday afternoon showing up here for this where all we're doing is chit chatting about some stuff, and we never really got to the nitty gritty on it. I was just
yeah,
like, I can be home with my family this afternoon.
yeah. And I think you're hitting on something there where there's a lot of fear
Yeah.
in church culture around the decline
Mm.
that we see, and I think there's a lot of fear that church in America is not what it used to be. Shocker.
True.
And we're getting closer and closer to post Christendom.
Yeah.
And the reality is, we're a lot closer than we think, and we're a lot further
Yeah.
than we think, because there are certain things that are integrated into the psyche of a lot of people here in this country, that there is still natural draws into the Christian calendar.
Yeah. Right.
Christmas and Easter, for example, the
Yeah.
traditional things where it's like, we sometimes are frustrated about Christian and Easter attenders, but we should say, thank God they're still coming then.
Yeah.
And
I
maybe we
actually,
can get them to have an experience where
yeah.
maybe the Holy Spirit moves. And at our church, we've been working with an organization actually out of Germany, and you may have heard of them in Nazarene circles, called Church in Action.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, their model flips uh, the practice of how you become a part of their church upside down.
Yeah.
Because in America, we have traditionally thought that you should come to church, get discipled, go
Yeah.
serve the world.
Yeah.
And so in Germany, population is 2% Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody's going to church.
Yeah.
And if nobody's going to church, under our model, nobody's getting discipled.
Right.
And yet there still seems to be, no matter what organization you see, there are people who are trying to do good in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an intrinsic thing that God hardwires into our heart, is that we want to make a difference in.
We want to make our environment better.
Yeah.
Inherently, we do.
Yeah.
And that's, like you say, God built that into us.
Yeah. And what that is that's actually prevenient grace, the prompting of the
Right.
Holy Spirit working in us to be like, things are not as they should be. Things are not at peace or at rest, or
Like, we all know that.
yeah,
You don't
and
have
we-
to go to seminary to figure that
yeah,
out.
and it's like, but you know what is good? Feeding the hungry.
Everybody can agree to this, right?
Yeah, and
Some of them say not in my backyard, but
Sure.
let's feed them somewhere.
but you know what else is good? People being able to read.
Yeah.
You know,
So that they can maybe earn
Yeah.
some money at a job and not be hungry.
giving somebody a trade
Let's
skill.
give them the tools
Yeah.
to not be homeless, not be hungry,
Yeah,
not be
and
yeah.
so Church in Action, one of the things that they do is they try to get non-Christian people, and they actually target only having 20% people in the group that already believe in Jesus.
Yeah, I heard that.
And so 80% of their group they're targeting are people who just want to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And then they go and they serve together. And then they also begin discipling conversations through the natural outflow of serving together.
Sure.
Because for those of us who have grown up in church and gone on mission trips and had experiences like that and done service projects, those conversations are more natural in that environment than they are in a church a lot of
Yeah.
time. And it's a lot easier and more organic to get people to say, you know, hey, we're going to go and hand out water together at, I don't know, in Oklahoma City, we just had the OKC Marathon.
Okay.
So we're going to go hand out waters at the marathon, and then after that, we're going to go and do this sort of thing. We have a homeless outreach
Yeah.
that we go and we just take them essentials that
Right.
they're allowed to have, and we go back to the same place once a month. And so the rest of the month is around finding out what these people's needs are, to where it's like, well, you know, everybody's like, well, we don't want to give them money. It's like, okay, but we're supposed to take care of the poor.
Yeah.
So how do we actually do that? Well,
Sure.
they need wipes, because like your shower problem,
Yep. Yep.
wipes are huge.
Oh yeah.
They're like the biggest blessing for
Right.
those people.
Right.
They have dogs. It's like, well, if you're homeless, why do you have a dog? Well, because I live in a dangerous place and I need protection. Okay,
It's
let's get 'em-
it's one comforting companion that they can count on to be there regardless of their situation.
And
And,
if-
you know, I've met a lot of homeless people like that, and part of me wants to say, like, you know, you could get into a shelter if you didn't have the dog, and they're
Yeah.
like, you know,
for a day.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's not a permanent thing. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, you know, that's one of the things that I had to get over because I thought
Yeah.
like I knew better, you know, and
Yeah.
and then you know, but I haven't lived in their tent and walked in their shoes,
Yeah.
and so I really don't know what that's like, and so yeah, give
Yeah.
them some dog food, you know.
Dog food.
There's a church
Because
in our
they're going to take
community.
their burger that
Yeah.
you give them on the side.
gonna give
they're
most
give
of
it
it
to
to
the
their dog.
dog.
There's a church in our community here that does a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of good stuff with that, and we're friends with them, and they do, you know, like they do dog food, and they also do laundry packs with
Yep.
like the little laundry detergent pods and like quarters, you
Yep.
know, and a couple dryer sheets
Yep.
or something. It's just like, here, you're gonna wash your clothes at the laundromat, or maybe you're not because you can't afford it. So like, here's your soap, here's some quarters,
Yep.
you know, and it's like, yeah, somebody could, sure, in theory, they could take the quarters and go do whatever
Yeah,
with
but
them.
that's
Who
between them
cares?
and
Exactly.
God. So
And like, if you find out somebody's doing that routinely, okay, maybe don't give it
Yeah.
to them, you
Mhm.
know. But like, should that keep us from doing it at all?
yeah, no.
Because I don't see people opening up their laundry room and saying,
Nope.
"Come use mine." So, if nothing else, then let them, you know. And that might be the thing that stands between them. Like, maybe they're trying to get a job, but their clothes are filthy. You
Well,
know,
that's another one.
you might have been helping to actually get them into a better place in life.
Yeah, and if you're worried about people taking your quarters and buying things that you don't want them to buy, go sit at the laundromat one Saturday
Dude,
a month and
Dude,
buy
my friend,
everybody.
my friend Joe Drake, here on the Mug, we do this Let's Talk podcast, and this is Joe. So we do this other podcast, shameless plug for that. Twice a month we put that out. And funny story, so we're recording an episode tomorrow morning via the internet, we recorded one yesterday, and by recorded one I mean we talked to each other over an internet connection where I thought I'd hit the record button and I hadn't. So 45 minutes in, I'm like, dude, Joe, we just that was a great conversation. We didn't capture any of that. It's
Yeah,
like, oh man.
I've had that
So
happen
yeah,
before.
fun times. So like
Yeah.
I keep nervously today checking the clock timer on the thing. I'm like, I did hit record, right? Yep, it's going, it's counting. We're
Yeah.
good. So but Joe's church has done that. They take board
Yeah.
games
Yep.
or little games or whatever. They buy some pizzas
Yep.
and they bring quarters and laundry soap and they sit with people at the laundromat and they're
Yep.
like, you know, hey, can we feed your washing machine and your dryer with quarters, you know, and feed your bellies,
Yep.
play games with the kids,
Yep.
and then sit down and talk. And it's like novel concept, right?
Yeah. And
You know,
then
super easy.
you say things like,
And
"We'll be here every month at this time.
yeah, yeah,
Come
like
see us
this is
again."
the time to show up.
Yeah.
And so there's a million things that you can do.
Yeah.
There's
And
one great example. Go and do it. You know,
yeah.
and if not that, do something else.
Well, and the one that the leader of Church in Action, his name's Philip Zimmerman. They're two Zimmerman brothers. I've just met Philip, but the one that kind of messes with church people. So we're going to go ahead and get into that at the end of things. Just
right? Why not? Why not stir things up now? Plug the
so
horn
they're
and
in
say,
Frankfurt.
yeah. So they're gonna meet in a pub.
Well, I wasn't even going there, but yes, they do.
Yeah.
They work the red light district.
Oh yeah.
They
That.
do care kits for
Right.
people who are professional sex workers.
Yeah.
So here's the one that's going to mess with our church people, because it's, what do you do with this? They built a relationship with this woman and invited her on a mission trip,
Oh wow.
and she didn't proclaim any faith.
Yeah.
She chose to go on the mission trip. She funded her mission trip first.
Yeah, and like we know how.
And
And the
so,
question is that something like can God take that
yeah,
and use that to you know work in her heart, but also
yeah.
in the people that they're ministering to?
So,
Obviously, the answer is yes, but
yeah.
tell me how it happens. Like,
So what happened is they built this relationship with this worker, and she was so moved and was in relationship, was like their most consistent person. She went
oh my
on the
goodness,
mission
wow.
went on the mission trip with them. Came back from the mission trip and is still, living the same life.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't necessarily have skills. We don't know all the things,
Sure.
I'm sure that the people in the direct story know more.
Yeah.
But as a pastor and as a congregant,
Yeah.
how comfortable are we waiting?
I'm just picturing too, like a couple, you know, if some
Yeah.
guys are going and their wife is, and they're
Yep.
like, "Hey, we're going on this." Like, I heard there's a prostitute coming along.
Yep.
Like, well, I mean, she's a person, you know,
Mhm.
and you know,
And-
she's coming to serve too.
And the thing is, we have created church to be a place where you have to behave
Yeah.
before you can belong.
Right. Yeah. You never see that like explicit.
Yeah.
Like it's usually like
Yeah.
belong, believe, become, or something like
Yeah.
that. But we never see behave. But it's like
Yeah,
implied.
but it is
like
implied.
learn our culture and learn how we act.
Yeah.
Become that, and then you can be part of us. And
Yeah.
that's backwards, right?
Yeah, and that's why they do their model that way, especially in a 2% Christian country.
Right.
And we're not quite to the same place,
Yeah.
and there's definitely work that they've had to do around that. And I would be fascinated to hear,
Yeah.
how does that conversation go with that leadership team? Because here's the cost.
Yeah.
If you don't take her on the trip with you, you label her.
And she lives into that label.
And she lives into the label,
Yeah.
and we have caused harm.
Perhaps irreparable harm at that point too,
Yeah.
because like is she going to give you another chance? She's seen your heart now.
Yeah.
And she's seen how stubborn it is.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot to chip through that stony
Yeah.
ground,
Well, and then the other side, just mess with your head a little bit more. There is a threat of, well, this is okay.
Yeah. Boy, we talk about
Man,
that.
that's the tension.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. I guess I'll just say in American churches or whatever, but in our churches, somebody comes in they seem to be in relationship with Christ, or maybe they come in and get into a relationship
Yeah.
with Christ, and they're being discipled, although we do a terrible job of that. That's a
Yeah.
different topic, but or not one we have enough time for, I guess,
Yeah.
unless we want to be up all night. But
Yeah.
you got an early flight tomorrow, so I'm not going to do
I
it
don't
to
even
you.
know what time it is.
Early, I think. But anyway, so we do mediocre to poor job of discipling most of the time. But man, where was I going with that? No, I don't even know. I lost it thinking about your airplane flight in the morning.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh well. You know.
Yeah.
But along those lines, though, we usually say, oh, so somebody will come in. Yeah. Yeah. So talking about like labeling people and all that. So somebody will come in, and they'll be, you know, somewhere along the path of discipleship, and yet there's obviously things in their lives that
Yeah.
are like maybe habitual ongoing sin. Maybe they're
Yeah.
living with their
Sure.
boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and we're like,
Yeah.
well, that's not how God. That's not God's plan for you. That's not right.
Yeah.
Is what we might say, and so we say, well, we want you to be here, we want you to be part of
Yep.
the church, and then we'll like kind of silo off an area that they can serve
A
in
safe place.
behind the scenes,
Yep.
preferably, because what you said, we don't want to stamp it as condoned behavior,
Yep.
and we think that if we put them, and so I've literally struggled with that because there's part of me that says, but we're not, like, we haven't made a statement that says, okay, we condone their lifestyle. What we are condoning is the fact that they're like growing closer to Christ, and that they actually want to serve him.
Yep.
Because nobody in their right mind, unless they're like just a starlet or something that's looking for attention, is going to be like, hey, can I be up on your stage and sing these songs? You know, like, they're probably doing that because they're actually grateful for what Christ is doing in their lives. So how can we embrace that and still call them to holiness? I mean, the Nazarene Church is still a holiness group, and hopefully hopefully we always will be. But we also, in that context, have to understand, like, God's got to start with them from somewhere, and far be it from me to try to step in the way of that. And so where I came to terms with it is this: when it comes to people living like that, of course, I mean, as the shepherd of the congregation, shepherd of the flock, I do have a responsibility to certain things, and so I have to live it and address it on that level. But man, just from a discipleship viewpoint, it is so much easier. You know, this is for me, this is for you, this is for any Christian. It's so much easier if we just say, you know what? I've been walking hand in hand with Christ for a long time, and he's taught me so many things. And all I want to do is hold your hand until you're ready to put your hand in the hand of Christ, and then I let go. And as soon as I let go of your hand and allow you to just hold hands with Christ and him to lead you and guide you, I don't have to do anything to clean you up. And so now it's the Holy Spirit's work to illuminate those areas in your life where you're not living right, and where you're not living, as we talked about earlier, like, God didn't create you to live this way. These are bringing death and not life. And let me show you, you know, like, should you eat, I'm not saying you shouldn't eat New York strips in the airport. We already established that. But should you eat like 2 New York strips a day? Probably not. That's probably a bad way of living. Should you eat like the whole package of bacon every time you cook it? Maybe if you only cook it once a month, but like, don't do that every day, maybe a couple strips, limit it, moderation. And so, the same way, the Spirit of God is going to be like, this isn't how you were created to live. This is what I want you to do. Is adultery a sin? Oh yeah. But Jesus talked about it, and he's like, adultery starts in your heart, and so what I'm worried about is what's in here. What you do externally is a symptom of what's going on in your heart and in your spirit, and I want to fix that part of you. And so for me, my job got so much easier when I finally relinquished control of that and said, it's not up to me to be their conscience. It's up to me to be their guide, in the sense that I'll guide them to Christ. And when they have questions along the way, like, I think God's telling me this, I'm like, yeah, he probably is, or when you start to step outside of that, I'm just like, no, God's not, God, that's not what God has for you. And so as soon as I see them start to pull away from Christ, I'm like, you get right back in that relationship. That's our job. So we're still going to wrestle with those things, like, should that person be there, so, the big one, that a lot of churches are struggling with is like, okay, well, what about, full affirming of people in homosexual relationships, or with their, with that being their, their identity or what have you. And it's like, the church has got to be a place where we welcome them as brothers and sisters. And until, first of all, until I can do that on an individual basis and say, like, I don't hate you, I don't have any animosity towards you, I'm not even judging you. All I want to do is see you come to Christ. If that can be our primary goal, is to see people come to Christ, it still makes that so much easier. Does that solve all the questions that we have? No, not at all. And I don't think you and I are going to answer those tonight, and I don't want to try. Because this has been a good conversation. And I hope people that watch it and listen to it are like, hey, I feel like this was good. And so I don't want to muddy those waters. But I do know that even in what tends to be one of the most, kind of hot button issues
Yep.
in it's not just the churches dealing with this. It's all throughout,
Yep.
secular culture and society too. I hope that somewhere we can land in a place as the church that says, as we look back, we learn to be welcoming, we learn to be inclusive of individuals and of people,
Yep.
and our job. What did Jesus tell us to do? To make disciples.
Yep.
And so part of that means just leading people to Jesus. And so what you were saying about church in action, you know, where does that start? Does that start after they
Yep.
behave like us and become like us? Or do those things begin to happen later? And so what if we gave people a place to serve and they just thought they were doing some good cause or social justice or something
Yep.
like that?
Which they are.
Which they are.
Yep.
There's a man I met named Daryl Kripe who works with, I think it's the Amplio group, I think is who he works with. But he talks with churches and helps them get on mission basically. And one of the things that he talks about is everybody discipling or kind of evangelizing, whatever you want to call it, like trying to reach one person, or maybe you might have two or three ones, but he calls them your ones, and everybody works towards that. And these are people that you intentionally orient your schedule, your life around being able to spend time with them. And it's not just like, okay, you lead them to Jesus and then you move on to the next one. Like these are people that you're friends with, that you care about, and you care about them so much that you want to do that. And so their church in Indianapolis actually has like a free grocery store for
Yep.
people that can't buy groceries. And so they'll shop this
Yep.
store with a cart. They'll
Yep.
go through a bagging station, and it might even scan them up just so they can keep stock. I don't know. And then, but it's free. And their church has a space. They can afford to do that. They're in a wealthy, like one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country, but yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot of poor among them that can't afford their food. And so this is one thing their
Yep.
church can do. So he has a foreign exchange student that's a German girl, and she's like atheist, like probably most of the rest of her country
Yep.
is. But she would serve there because she
Sure.
thought she's doing social justice, is what he said. And he's like, and she is.
She is.
But she's also partnering with Christ, and she doesn't know it yet. So his group started also working in Germany. So he's like, I get a chance now to go and visit her and her family. Like she's still in my life, even after going back to Germany after her year of studying here. And so it's like, that if they said, no, you can't serve here because you're not a Christian, you can't serve in this capacity because that, I guarantee she wouldn't want to see him when he comes and visits over there. So,
Yep. Yeah, and realizing that our responsibility is to love people.
Yeah.
And our responsibility is to give opportunity for people to see Christ work through our actions.
Yeah.
And the Spirit is so much better at being the Spirit than we ever could be. And just trusting that the Spirit is going to work things out if we're faithful. I think that's really, if you read the entirety of Scripture, I think that's really the only thing that we're called to.
Yeah.
Is to be faithful. And if we're faithful, we've done everything we can and we receive the reward.
And isn't that what Jesus said, when there's a final judgment with its rewards and punishments, as we say in some of our liturgy, and he says, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Yeah. I think that one has to be quoted in King James. Thou has to be there. I don't know. I'm not a King James guy, but that one you got to quote in King James. He's like, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And that's the thing that we strive to hear, because that means we lived how we were designed to live. And so, we talked earlier about being partners with God and his ministry on this earth, and that's what we're doing. So anyway, well, I think we've had a good little conversation here for probably almost a couple hours now, I think. So yeah, right at it. That was a good time.
How much you put on there? You put the full 2 hours.
Oh yeah, pretty much.
Oh, wow.
We're going. We don't edit. All really. Right. Yeah, unless one of us said something really stupid that we wish we hadn't, and I don't remember anything that I cringed at. So, yeah, this is a deep dive into a
so
conversation.
Joe Rogan style.
Yeah, I mean, man, that's controversial bringing up his name, but no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny how he can be like, he can just have conversations with people who are like, I can't believe he would think that. It's like, well, that's his guess, but he has another guy that says a different thing, and like, well, he's too whatever, he's too conservative, he's too whatever. It's like, he's a fan of Bernie Sanders. Like he's,
Yeah.
you know, if you confuse common sense with conservatism, fine, whatever. But like, you know,
Yeah.
he's pretty balanced on a lot of things, and you're not going to agree with 100%. You know, you might not agree with half of him, but he has a lot of interesting people on.
Yeah.
And yeah, they'll talk for like 3 and 4 hours sometimes
Yeah.
with certain people. So I like to sit and have the conversation for however long it goes. When it feels like it's done, don't force it. It's time for that conversation to be over. So
Yeah.
that's my theory on it. And if people want to listen straight through, fine. If they want to break it up into segments, I mean, I do that with some stuff. I talked about Lex Friedman, I think,
Yeah.
is a podcast I like to listen to, and he, you know, his stuff I'll listen to it because some of his guests fascinate me, and they're all smarter than me, so I feel like I could learn something from him. And yeah, his stuff goes on 2, 3, 4 hours.
Yeah.
So I can't get through that in one setting most of the time, but sometimes I can. So
Yeah.
I'll listen to that while I'm at the gym or something, and you know, go that way. But yeah, if somebody finds, you know, there's a million podcasts. If you don't like the length of this one, find another
Yeah.
one. Like I'm, you know, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt my feelings any. So.
Yeah.